Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Is there going to be food in this house today or what? The father of the family asked loudly and indignantly. Benjamin, honey, but we just had dinner. Kathy looked surprised at her husband, who was sitting in front of an empty plate, holding a spoon in his hand and looking at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner and was determined not to understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. "Oh, so it was dinner?" Benjamin asked mockingly. "I thought dinner should have some meat in it, at least in a man's dinner. You're the one who can get by with a cabbage leaf for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm the one who works and brings money into the family. And as I thought, I had the right to expect a decent meal for that money." Kathy bit her lip. She belatedly realized that the old story was starting again, repeating itself every time the month came to an end. Each time, her husband approached this conversation very differently than the previous one. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. I didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more. She had heard all of Benjamin's arguments many times before, and many times she had answered them with her own. But they had never been able to come to an agreement. Nothing new. Kathy was sure of it. Neither of them had come up with anything, which meant that the continuation of this conversation would be as pointless as before. Still, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't the answer either. 2 or 3 times she had tried this tactic before, and the result was not to her liking at all. "Benjamin," Kathy began gently, "we've had this discussion many times before. Should we start this again?" "It is." Her husband interrupted her firmly. "We're going to have this conversation until the situation changes. Or, to be more precise, until you get your act together and go to work. I can't, after all, drag you all around my neck forever." Kathy spluttered. "Honey, how can I go to work? They're not taking the little ones to daycare yet. There's no room anywhere. We can't afford a nanny, even if I got a job somewhere. But other people manage somehow, without any nannies. Other people have grandparents, sisters and brothers, someone else. But we have no one. I'm an orphan, and your parents don't want to take care of the kids, even for half a day. So I could get a part-time job. Don't put this on my parents again. They raise their own kids, and they don't have to take care of yours." Kathy froze on the spot, even stopped washing the dishes, which she had begun to do during this awkward conversation. The word alone hurt her, as if her husband had hit her. However, she wasn't sure physically hitting her wouldn't have come out less painful. "What do you mean with mine?" she exclaimed. "They are our children, Benjamin. You wanted them as much as I did." Benjamin grinned wickedly. "I did, but I didn't," he said. "It's not like we agreed that I'd have to carry the whole lot on my back. I thought that you'll sit on maternity leave for a while, and then, like all normal people, you'll go back to work. And now that you're a housewife, the kids are your responsibility, and I have nothing to do with them." Kathy felt as if someone was squeezing her throat with strong fingers. These statements were something new. Benjamin had never made such statements before. Yes, he complained that he had to feed his family alone, on his salary, which was not very high. His wife couldn't provide him with what he thought he needed, but never before had he claimed that their joint children had nothing to do with him. Benjamin, however, as if reading her thoughts, and certainly seeing her condition perfectly well, decided, it seems, to finally finish his wife. "And as for the younger ones, which you, so actively covering your laziness," he said, so I'm not sure that it's from me. I worked all day while you and Michael were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have been visiting you during that time." Of course, Kathy couldn't take such unfair accusations any longer. Gasping, choking with tears, almost unable to see her way, she rushed out of the kitchen and, not realizing how she had done it, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Michael was looking after his younger brother and sister. Surprised, he looked up at her. "Mom?" he asked in an unusually serious tone for his age. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, son. Everything is fine." Kathy belatedly, realizing her mistake, tried to inconspicuously wipe away her tears. The boy looked at her carefully, then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he decided that his mother didn't want to disturb the little ones, and that was why he was trying to pretend that everything was fine. Kathy didn't try to dissuade him, but just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day, Michael would have more important things to do and would not remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to go with her grief. There were only 2 rooms in their apartment, a child's room and an adult's room, and the second room was where her husband could come at any moment. Kathy didn't want to see him now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up his favorite subject so easily and would continue to annoy her with his remarks. There was only one way out, despite the lateness of the hour, and that was to leave the apartment. Of course, leaving the children virtually alone was not the best solution. On the other hand, in such a state, she obviously will not be able to interact with them normally. And therefore, whether she is in the apartment or not does not play a special role. The younger ones would still be left in Michael's care. At least Kathy had no doubt that he would put them to bed properly and go to bed on time. Her son was responsible beyond his years, loved to mess around with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to let the children be alone for long periods of time. But when Michael took to tutoring the younger ones in her presence, she could see that he was doing a great job with them. Yes, she was lucky to have a son, and at the moment that was her only consolation. She walked aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the beginning of the rain, small and nasty. All her thoughts were centered on one single question: how she had come to such a life. How had her happy youthful love ended when her husband openly accused her of infidelity without any reason? Kathy remembered how they had met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, to be a perfect couple. Their relationship developed like in some romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants, huge gorgeous bouquets of flowers. Both of them had a great future ahead of them, and hardly anyone could imagine the poverty and doom in which these people found themselves now. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Benjamin began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that?" He said, "My income is enough for 2. You will stay at home, cook, clean, bring up children after all." At first, Kathy flatly refused to even hear about it. Raised in an orphanage, who had every chance to be at the bottom of life, she, by incredible diligence and by some miracle, managed to get into decent society. And now she clung to that opportunity with all her might. However, in the end, Benjamin managed to convince the girl that now this wonderful new world, in any case, will not go anywhere from her. And at first, everything was really good. Kathy, as Benjamin had planned, was setting up a household in the common house while he was doing his business. They had enough money, even with a surplus. Nevertheless, somehow it didn't work out. There were always some not obligatory, but pleasant things that I wanted to buy right now. And perhaps none of them at that time thought about the need for any savings. My parents would help us in case of emergency, Benjamin assured his young wife. When she timidly started talking about it, "You know they're not poor," Kathy still didn't know. He himself at that time believed what he was saying or was deceiving her, confident that that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while, something happened to his business. Kathy did not go into details and knew only that over time it began to give less and less profit until, in the end, did not finally collapse. And that's when it became clear that Benjamin's parents weren't going to help the young family in any way. "Except for you," his father told him. "We have younger children who are not yet on their feet. And you're a grown man, and you have to deal with your problems on your own." Then they had to sell the luxurious large apartment in which they lived and move to a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Surprisingly enough, Benjamin himself was most dissatisfied with this arrangement. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to carry a rather miserable existence. Kathy, on the other hand, was philosophically calm. She, of course, had also become accustomed to a poor life, but she had once led it, and therefore was more prepared for various difficulties and knew what to do under such conditions. Quite quickly she found a job. She got a job in a store as a saleswoman. The salary, of course, was modest, but it was still better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself anyway. Benjamin, on the other hand, chose a completely different way to solve his problems. He went on a long-term bender. Kathy didn't blame her husband for anything. Things happen in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire him, calm him down, and support him. And in the end, her efforts succeeded. Drinking Benjamin stopped and began to develop new ideas for business, which would allow their family to return to its former wealth and prosperity. However, with these ideas, always something did not go well, even if it was possible to save some initial amount and start a new business. Quite quickly, there were all sorts of difficulties that brought all Benjamin's efforts to naught. And the longer it went on, the more unbearable the man's character became. "I do not have enough money to fully realize my projects," he frankly told Kathy. "But what can I do, sweetheart?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I work almost no weekends. I just don't have anywhere else to take the time to earn even more. Of course, if I'd finished college, it would have been much easier. But what's to be sorry about now? This situation should be a lesson to both of us. I need to finish my studies and find a normal job. Besides, like I said, I'll need to save up. But of course, that's just for when we get out off. How are we going to get out?" Her husband was indignant. "Well, to have more money." Shyly stammering Kathy, "You could get yourself some part-time work, even for half a day." "I don't have time for that." Benjamin was adamant. "In case you haven't noticed, while you're working for pennies, I'm trying to rebuild the business and get us back on track, and you're not helping me at all." "But I'm really doing the best I can," Kathy replied in surprise. "No." Her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There's something you haven't done, even though I've repeatedly explained to you how important it is to me and to you. Honey, you seem to forget that even though I didn't get a full education, I studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolutely insane. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me on things I know something about. You just don't believe in me," in a frustrated voice. Benjamin replied, "You think that if I've made mistakes once, I'll make them all the time and I'll never make them again." After such statements, Kathy, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he is deeply mistaken and no one believes in him as much as she does. Eventually, this conversation would end with nothing, only to begin again the next day. However, no matter how hard Benjamin tried, there was no way Kathy could agree to his plan. And his proposal was very simple: to take out a large loan in her name to put the money into business. He, a bankrupt, and in addition officially unemployed, no bank wanted to lend. Therefore, he could not realize his idea without the help of his wife. Kathy urged him to think about how they would pay back the loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that this was not the way to restore the former status, but to an even deeper hole, and to her luck, she did not give in to any persuasion from her husband. And then she got pregnant with Michael. And Benjamin had to leave all his business ideas and get a job to be able to feed his family, which was soon to become even bigger. Of course, he was not happy about this prospect, but both spouses were still sure that this situation was temporary. Kathy did not plan to stay on maternity leave for long and was going to go to work as soon as she got her son into nursery school. But this plan was not destined to come true either. There were no places in kindergartens, and pretty soon Kathy realized that there was nothing to dream about nursery schools. Well, if the term will come up in 3 or 4 years. And then it happened that she got pregnant again, just when she was 3 years old, and gave birth to 2 children. That's when Benjamin started to talk about her going back to work. She realized it herself. But how could she do that with 3 small children in her arms? Over time, her husband became more and more insistent, but the situation did not change, which eventually led to the ugly conflict that happened that unfortunate evening. That's what Kathy was thinking about. Wandering aimlessly in the darkness of the night through the streets of the neighborhood, which for so many years had become almost dear to her. Fortunately, although it was on the outskirts of the city, it was considered quite prosperous. Any crime was extremely rare here. Therefore, it was quite safe to move even at this late hour. However, that was the last thing on the woman's mind. Suddenly her attention was drawn to something strange. Kathy, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts and memories, did not even immediately realize what had alarmed her. It was as if a neon sign had flashed somewhere in her subconscious, informing her that something in the space around her was wrong. Snapping out of her own musings, the woman looked around and rather quickly discovered the cause of her vague unease. It was a little girl, the same age as her Michael. In her smart pink dress, she was sitting on the curb all by herself, gazing at the asphalt beneath her feet. Kathy raised her eyebrows in surprise. She'd never encountered street kids in her neighborhood, not begging, not just wandering the streets, especially at a time like this. Still, decent enough people lived here to let their kids out alone at night, and at the same time far from rich enough to have beggars interested in the neighborhood. Besides, the girl didn't look like a street kid or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She was wearing nice and clean, obviously new clothes, and she behaved quite differently from what one would expect from little vagrants. The whole situation surprised Kathy. Surprisingly, it was unimportant, a background of sorts. In her mind, she realized all these details much later, when she was once again replaying this strange encounter in her head. Right now, she was only interested in one thing: a child on the street at night, which meant she was in potential danger. She had to give this girl all the help she could. With that in mind, she approached the child carefully, so as not to frighten her, and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were on the same level. Kathy spoke softly and affably. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "I don't know." The girl answered surprisingly calmly. "What is it?" Kathy was surprised. "It's like this. I mean, I probably knew it once, but I forgot. And who are your parents and where are they?" I don't know. I don't remember, said the girl. Do you remember anything at all? Cautiously inquired Kathy. This time the girl didn't say anything, just shook her head silently. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. But how did you get here? I came, the girl answered. From where? From there. The child waved his hand indifferently, showing the direction. And what was there? A forest or a park or something? I don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything. I just went somewhere. And now I was tired, so I decided to sit. Kathy shook her head perplexed. She didn't like this whole situation, and she had no idea what she should do about it. Finally, after a while of silence and thought, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, signaling that she hadn't eaten in a long time. Okay. Tiredly, Kathy sighed. Come with me, I'll feed you, and you'll sleep in our apartment with my children. And in the morning we'll think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'm gonna call you Molly for now. Do you mind? No. Quite indifferently answered the new Molly. Taking the girl's hand firmly, Kathy headed for home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately went out of her mind. That was just the way she was. If someone needed help, her own problems moved to the back of her mind. Especially unbearable for her as a mother was this situation with a neglected child who couldn't even remember his own name. When they reached the apartment without any accidents, it was already about 2 o'clock. All of Kathy's housemates, as she was immediately convinced, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was pricked by a vague resentment. None of them seemed to care where she was at this late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Explaining to her children and her husband, especially her husband, where this girl had come from and why she was in their apartment, Kathy had no desire to do so. She quietly went to the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the refrigerator, and fed the little waif. Once full, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Molly not only had not eaten for a long time, but also had not slept for a long time. Kathy decided to make a bed for her on the couch and settled down on the floor. Monstrously tired for the day, she fell asleep very quickly, forgetting to even set her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before everyone else in the house. After all, she had to make breakfast, her husband had to get ready for work, and her oldest son had to go to school. Besides, she was the only one in the family who was a lark, and early rising for her was not only habitual, but also pleasant. But of course, that didn't extend to when she had to go to bed late under those circumstances. Waking up without an alarm clock proved to be extremely difficult. Naturally, Kathy overslept, and her awakening was not the most pleasant, for she awoke to someone shaking her roughly by the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she saw Benjamin's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast is not ready. You're still asleep, not in bed, but on the kitchen floor. And explain to me, please, who is that girl sleeping on the couch?" At first, Kathy didn't even realize which girl he was talking about. Then she remembered her night's adventures and tried to explain to Benjamin what was going on. He listened with a skeptical expression on his face. Then he said that Molly would be gone when he got home from work. Without breakfast, he left for work, leaving Kathy to come to her senses. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. After only a few minutes, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to simply wake Michael up, let alone getting him ready for school. And sure enough, the child was sleeping peacefully in his crib. If Benjamin was already late for work, It was time for Michael to leave the house. For the first time that morning, Kathy looked at her watch and clutched her head. Her son's first class was due to start in 10 minutes. Waking Michael up, she quickly made him a light breakfast and sent him off to class. It wasn't a long walk to school, and the boy could manage it on his own. However, Kathy realized that he would still be late, and that meant that he, and therefore she, would soon be in trouble. However, Kathy wasn't going to think about that right now, as she had other difficulties that required some immediate action. Fortunately, all the hurry that had taken place in the house during the previous half hour had not disturbed Molly's sound sleep. Her rescuer decided to wait until the girl woke up herself, and in the meantime to take care of her own small children and think about what she should do. The girl did not get up until 2 o'clock, and by this time Kathy had already developed a clear plan of action. It was just about time for a walk with the kids, and she decided, taking Molly with her, to stop by the nearest police station. After all, that's what law enforcement is for, to deal with cases like this. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" The officer on duty at the station asked her. "That's right. And she can't even remember her name?" "That's correct." Kathy confirmed it again. She didn't understand the point of this procedure. The woman had already told the whole story once. Then she told it again in a written statement. And now, reading her statement, the police officer for some reason again asked about literally all the circumstances that she had already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police right away?" "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that it was necessary to do exactly that." "I see," sighed the duty officer. Molly turned out not to realize that it was about her. Or she did, but she didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, she looked at the room they were in with interest. Although in Kathy's opinion, there was nothing fascinating or even beautiful about it, nor could there be. "And what do you plan to do with the child?" The policeman asked after a moment's silence. "What do you mean?" Kathy was surprised. The question had shocked her before it had been asked. The woman sincerely believed that now the girl's fate was the responsibility of the law enforcers. Directly, the duty officer replied indifferently, "We can put her in a special institution, or she can stay with you for now." Kathy's eyes darkened. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she would not be here by this evening. On the other hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she wouldn't be here by tonight. And she realized that they couldn't afford another child. They could barely manage their own. All this was understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was in the words, a special institution, an orphanage. It was unthinkable to let this girl go there. Kathy remembered very well, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it had been for her to live and grow up in the orphanage, how she had had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of the educators. For her it was all in the past. She endured and overcame everything. But she was born into a dysfunctional family and lost even the parents she had. She was used to hardship since she was a child. For her, this kind of treatment was the order of the day. Molly, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that she was a homely, beloved, maybe even a little spoiled child with obvious mental trauma, since she couldn't remember her past or even her real name. Kathy was absolutely obvious that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of the orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman had no time to go through all these long and tedious thoughts in her head. But they were undoubtedly what motivated her decision. Looking into the eyes of the duty officer, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." That was the policeman's perfect answer. He was obviously expecting such an answer, and when he received it, he suddenly opened up. I'm an orphan myself. I can see that this girl doesn't belong in an institution like this. That's what I thought. Quite coldly, Kathy replied. As a matter of fact, he went on, not noticing her tone, it's not exactly in the rules to leave her with you. But I'll try to straighten it out. Good, the woman replied. Can we go now? Yes, of course. If we hear anything about the little girl's relatives, we'll call you. But to tell you the truth, I'd advise you to start looking on your own. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police. When Kathy finally got home, she found a distraught Michael there. He had already returned from school and dejectedly showed his mother his diary, which contained a note about his tardiness and the fact that the class teacher had called her in. I'm sorry, Mom. Guiltily, the son said. I should have gotten up myself in the morning. No, you didn't, Kathy replied. You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning, not because it's my job or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed. So I'm the one who should be apologizing to you. From their conversation, it would seem that no other girl was present in the apartment. Michael, though he squinted at her with some bewilderment, tactfully did not ask any questions. Kathy once again thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, unlike many, even the twins, had been a trouble-free child in his early childhood. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kathy set about preparing dinner. Then everyone sat down at the table, much to the woman's surprise. Michael and Molly had somehow managed to become friends and were chatting animatedly about something of their own. And only after the meal, when the girl was not around, her son approached her with an obvious question. Mom, is Molly going to live with us now? I asked her, but she doesn't know yet. Yes, son. Kathy replied, the girl is lost and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage. It's a good thing she's staying. Unexpectedly, Michael concluded. Why? Mom was surprised. The younger ones like her. Her son told her earnestly, so it'll be easier for you and me now. Patting his hair, Kathy laughed and went about her usual chores, laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband. She preferred not to think about what would happen when he returned from work. However, the scandal exceeded all her expectations. What the hell is this? Almost shouting, he was pacing the kitchen. Do not you have enough of your own? You picked up some other mongrel. She's not a mongrel. She was sticking up for Kathy. Besides, it's only temporary until her parents are found. We can't let her end up in a foster home. I mean, look at her. She's a total home child. There's no reason for her to be there. There's a special institution for people like her. And she has no business being here. Have you given it any thought? Our charity worker. How are we going to feed her, clothe her? And all the other expenses associated with keeping a child. What do you know about child-related expenses? Unexpectedly, even to herself, Kathy burst into flames. Have you ever bought anything for them? Do you have any idea what a child's needs are? She didn't know what had prompted her to begin this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just a resentment that had built up in her soul over the years, and now she needed a place to vent it. Her husband listened to her angry confession, unusually quiet, without interrupting or objecting. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kathy kept talking and talking, saying everything that had accumulated in her soul, and that the money that he earns, categorically not enough to live on, and that it could have been avoided if he had gotten a job right away instead of sitting on her neck for several years. She even reminded him of the various excesses that he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies that he gave her to somehow feed and clothe the whole family. She talked, of course, not only about money, also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she lacked the former love and romance, not only and not so much flowers and gifts, of course not. She would like some simple human attention, and at least a little warmth and participation, instead of constant unfair reproaches. Well, in a perfectly calm tone, Benjamin said, when Kathy had finally finished her monologue, "I take it you're all much better off without me than with me." The ominous phrase hung in the air, and the man, without another word, took a large suitcase out of the closet in the room and began to pack his belongings into it. Kathy, it would seem, should have, seeing this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loved him. Persuade him not to make any hasty decisions, and only some 2 days ago she would have done just that. But now she looked on with the equanimity that had ruined her. Benjamin was assembling at an emphatically leisurely pace and glanced occasionally at Kathy. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her too, and probably more intent on scaring the woman than actually going. If so, his plan didn't work, and once the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat to. "To hell with you," he threw angrily to his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kathy stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved goodbye and went into the nursery. There Molly and Michael did their best to calm the younger children, obviously frightened by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The older ones were as pale as chalk, but feeling responsible, they tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Daddy not coming back?" Michael finally asked. Kathy noted that there was not an ounce of regret or joy in his voice. In fact, he didn't really care whether Daddy came back or not. He was just clarifying the information. Of course he did. The man who rarely came home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back in a while." So they became a family of 5, 4 children, and Kathy herself. If at first she had feared that without her husband's help she would not be able to support such a horde of hungry mouths, she soon discovered that this was not the case. On the contrary, without constant scandals and ridiculous demands to live much easier and calmer. This was despite the fact that there was no money for household expenses. Benjamin allocated from his salary some very tiny amount, while the bulk of them Kathy paid from her maternity pay. It was getting close to the time when the former were due to expire, and that was a bit of a problem. Kathy realized there was no way she could go full-time with 4 young children. But suddenly, with Benjamin gone, she had the energy and time to slowly start looking for part-time options. And that's where a few happy accidents helped her. First, she got a call from the principal of a kindergarten, the enrollment line in which her children were waiting. Without saying anything specific on the phone, she persuasively asked Kathy as soon as possible to come to the institution for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began the meeting. "I understand that you have been waiting for a long time for your children to be able to enroll in our daycare center. So long that one of them has already managed to go to school." Kathy replied somewhat irritably. "I'll tell you a secret," the principal remarked. "By the time it's your turn, the younger ones will have already gone to school. Many are left without a garden. Unfortunately, we have many more children than places. And don't look at me like that. I didn't come up with this, and it's not in my power to change it. Why did you call me? Just to tell me we don't stand a chance. On the contrary, I called you here to offer you a solution to this problem. You see, the nursery nurse quit a while ago. No one stays long, you know, and there's no way to find a new one. The remaining staff are knocked down and are also about to run away. So I thought I should offer this vacancy to someone who has been waiting for a long time. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work and the pay is low. But we can get your kids into an age-appropriate group right away. And why are you suggesting this to me? Kathy asked suspiciously. I don't even have a teaching degree. Surely there are more suitable candidates, but you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in the job you have to do, that's more important. However, I will not hide more suitable candidates. As you put it, we also made such an offer, but none of them accepted it. So we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal, and you were not the first one I called. Is that answer satisfactory? Kathy was fine with that. Now she had some work, which could be perfectly combined with taking care of the younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend a few hours in the apartment without her and to heat their own lunch. Moreover, the kindergarten was not far from their school and home. Of course, they were not living very well, but not worse than before Benjamin left. Life was beginning to get better, and after a while, a second good thing happened. This time Kathy was called in by the same police officer on duty who had taken her statement about finding Molly in the street a few weeks ago. Any news about her parents? Kathy asked hopefully. Alas, none, the policeman replied. Like I told you, we're not very good at this sort of thing, especially since the data set on her is minimal. Have you tried looking for her yourself? I didn't have time for that, the woman shrugged. I have 3 of my own besides her, you know. And recently my husband left. I see. The policeman sighed. But in general, I called you on a very specific case. You see, I've finally managed to formalize Molly's stay with you. That means that now you can put her in school and everything. That's great, Kathy replied. The fact that Molly couldn't go to school was really stressing the woman out. For now, she was tutoring her on her own. But she realized that this issue would have to be resolved no later than the beginning of the next school year. And already summer was fast approaching. And that meant that the problem would soon become acute. Yes, besides, you become the girl's legal guardian. That, of course, comes with certain benefits. Plus, I understand you'll qualify for certain benefits as a mother of many children. It worked out exactly as he said. Of course, there was never enough money for anything. But now, at least Kathy could be sure that the children would be clothed, fed, and enrolled in school. Contrary to her fears, life without Benjamin had not collapsed not only financially, but emotionally as well. No matter how hard she tried, she still could not experience any feelings about his departure. Something must have burned out in her, the very moment her husband recklessly accused her of non-existent infidelity. Such a reaction was very surprising to Kathy herself. But for all that, it couldn't help but make her happy. With 4 children in her arms, it would be bad timing, the misery of a collapsed love. On the other hand, perhaps the children were precisely what contributed to her peace of mind. With all the cares, she had no time to indulge in sadness and despair. And so 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all family members, it was decided to conditionally divide the apartment into 2 halves, a male and a female. Molly and the younger Jenna moved into Kathy's room, where the adults used to live. Michael and his brother Mason stayed in his room. It was cramped, of course, but so far it hadn't caused any particular problems. Molly and Michael's friendship was growing stronger every day. They now went to the same school. True, the girl was a grade younger. The boy treated her like another little sister and patronized her in every possible way. With the younger children, she also had a great relationship. In short, Despite her unexpected appearance, she fit perfectly into the family. Kathy herself loved the girl as her own daughter and sometimes even forgot that this is not true. Molly, in turn, quite quickly got used to calling the woman Mom and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the girl was discovered amicably decided to consider her birthday. Kathy, it seemed quite symbolic. After all, who knows what might have happened to Molly if she hadn't caught her eye in time? In a way, it could be said that it was Benjamin's horrible scene that night that had saved the little girl from a much sadder fate. And although Kathy was glad that Molly was now her daughter, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Was there no one looking for the girl? On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for the found child, and all to no avail. The police also did not succeed in finding her parents. The fact that the girl had never regained her real memories added to the worry. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course could not be true. And Kathy would very much like to know how things really were. But the various doctors at the budgetary polyclinic only waved their hands. They had never dealt with such severe cases and had no idea what to do in such a situation. The only thing that one of them could do was to give the contacts of a good private clinic, specializing in helping children who have lost their memory. But the family, of course, had no money for this. Molly herself, the lack of memories of the past, it seemed, did not bother in the slightest. She childishly naive lived today and knew only that in this day it is good for her. And what was there before all this was not so important. Kathy couldn't understand that either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some way. She herself at her age wanted to know who her parents were and why they were no longer with her. And in the end, she had so driven the teacher with her questions that she had answered her honestly and directly. Alcoholics, they were back alley, she said through her teeth. Unnecessary and useless, like you yourself. Then they died, and you fell on our heads. You got what you wanted. Are you happy? Now go scrub the toilets. It's your turn. Remembering this episode, Kathy sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Molly had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman found her, she didn't look at all like a kid who'd had a lot of bad luck in this life. Quite the opposite. And it often occurred to her that it might have been much more comfortable and pleasant for the girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kathy could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. And in the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps it was at that moment that she finally decided that the girl was not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then the question arose. That is not just to be her guardian and fully adopt the child. And here she faced a funny and at the same time sad legal subtlety. Still in an official marriage, she could not do it without her husband's consent. That meant only one thing: she had to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kathy dialed Benjamin's number. She didn't want to talk to the man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the courts. But such a process would take much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she had had no contact whatsoever for 2 years, would simply agree to peacefully file a complaint and go their separate ways, not just virtually, but officially. Kathy, she heard Benjamin's affectionate voice in the receiver. "I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you." Kathy was taken aback. On the one hand, something painful, yet sweet, pricked her heart. It was exactly the tone he'd spoken to her in before, even before all the horror that had happened to them. And for a moment, it was like she was back in those happy times. For another, it sounded extreme, inappropriate now. "I know you miss me too, and you'll make the right decision in the end." Benjamin continued inspiringly, "You can't just leave your husband because of some street girl. You're calling to tell me that this problem has been resolved and I can come back, aren't you? All the happy memories are gone." With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kathy of the reason why, when he left, she was not even very upset about it, and she answered in the coldest possible tone, "Benjamin, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce. So you got yourself a new man." His voice immediately lost all its affection. "That was fast, I'll give you that. I have not found anyone, and in general, it is none of your business exactly since you left me alone with 4 children in my arms. Like you said, we got along just fine without you. And now I'd like to settle this last technicality. I did not leave you." The husband said indignantly, "I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with that girl, and I wasn't in a position to carry another child, so I got out of your life until you solved this problem." "Believe me, I've solved all my problems except the one I'm calling you about. Let's end this useless conversation." "Benjamin, I don't need you or my kids anymore." "Oh well," now there was real rage in his voice. "In that case, sue me. I won't give you a divorce, but I suggest you think twice before you do it. And for example, remember that the apartment you and I bought in marriage, it's a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who aren't too keen on having me here. Do you see where I'm going with this?" And with those words, he hung up. Kathy could not believe what she had heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? In fact, he threatened to take away her and the children's only corner of the house if she did. Could it really be true? That romantic, loving young man she once married, but she had nowhere to retreat. After a few more attempts to peacefully negotiate with her husband, she realized it was all useless. Either she gets rid of Molly and Benjamin comes home, or divorce through the court with division of the apartment. He wouldn't hear of any other options. "I realize you still need time to come to your senses," he said in one of those conversations, "and I'm not in any hurry to make a decision. But since you deign to talk to me, keep in mind that I'm waiting for it, for your decision. And even my patience isn't unlimited." Kathy herself didn't want to drag this whole thing out, maintaining a status of sorts. It was clear that it was impossible to hang this issue indefinitely. It was necessary to solve it right now. After all, Molly's formal adoption was also a kind of formality. Like this divorce, it was true. But what if, for example, she wants to remarry? In the end, Kathy made up her mind after all and applied to the court. Before doing so, she did one thing. She tried to explain to the children in terms they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before, and at least for a while they would all have to live in a one-room apartment. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to the decision. Benjamin kept his word and really tried to sue for the part of the apartment that belonged to him. However, unexpectedly, the court rejected his claim. The judge cited the fact that all their children live in the apartment with their mother. In addition, there is also the only place of residence of another child. Therefore, it is impossible to divide the apartment in any way, unless if part of the children's hapless father will take to his upbringing. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The children were too young to have their opinions and desires taken into account by the court. Consequently, at this point everything depended on Benjamin's answer. For a few minutes he looked triumphantly at his former wife. She understood that he didn't want children, but for the sake of jangling his nerves, he might agree to the proposal, and then they will face many months of new trials, fighting for the children, which of course he will lose. But all of this will take away Kathy's time and money, not to mention 1 million nerve cells. However, the husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems at all either. So he agreed to let the children stay with their mother. But in this case, he is entitled to compensation in the amount of the market value of his half of the apartment. The court agreed. However, taking into account Kathy's small income and the number of her dependents, she had to pay this money in small amounts over many years. Not that this decision satisfied either side. Nevertheless, it was the only possible compromise. In Kathy's family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, however she had prepared them, appeared terrified of the legal process, especially the prospect of being separated and forced to live with a father the younger ones didn't even remember. And now that it was all behind them, the boys were jubilant. Besides, being a completely free woman and Molly's longtime guardian, Kathy, though not without difficulty, was able to get the girl officially adopted. This was the occasion for a big celebration by their standards. Inexpensive but tasty cake from the store and a trip to the amusement park were to be its indispensable attributes. None of the Kathy children had ever been to such a place in their lives, but of course, each of them dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman cut all the expenses she could, just to save up money for this trip and arrange a real entertainment for her children. And now the big day has come. The children looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, trying everything at once was out of the question. And fortunately, even the little ones were well aware of these limitations. Only Molly, the usual, noisy and cheerful one, behaved in a peculiarly quiet way. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a very different kind of wonder from everyone else's. Molly paid very little attention to the rides themselves. They seemed very familiar to her. "Molly, are you all right?" Kathy asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, I'm fine," Molly replied, her voice quiet and colorless. This startled the woman even more. The intonation of the child was radically at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely out of character for Molly. Open and trusting. She was not used to hiding her emotions, so her attempt to do so was a complete failure, and it alarmed her foster mother even more. However, Kathy did not continue this dialogue. She realized that if Molly had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned, she would only succeed in making the girl even more withdrawn. Otherwise, there's a good chance she'll want to share her feelings. And so it happened. Kathy's own children were completely mesmerized by their surroundings. Unaware of their surroundings, they argued passionately about which attraction to try first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went on the Ferris wheel. Molly unexpectedly refused to go with them, citing fear of heights. No one tried to talk her out of it. She and Kathy sat down on a bench, from which they had a good view of the wheel's cabin, in which the others sat, all the way to the Ferris wheel. An awkward silence reigned for a while. Then the girl interrupted it with a phrase that her foster parent least expected to hear. "Mom, you just don't get angry with me." She started and stopped halfway through, trying to see Kathy's reaction in her eyes. "Have I ever been angry with you?" Kathy replied in surprise. "No," Molly said, embarrassed. "But you can now." "Why, sunshine." "What's wrong? You see, ever since we came to this park, I feel like I know it. Like I've been here before. Maybe you have. It's not like I've." She shut down again. Kathy felt a sense of joyous anticipation. Could it be that memories were beginning to return to the girl? Could it be that her real parents had actually taken her to this particular park, or just a similar one? and now the surroundings are helping her regain her memory. Why should I be angry about this? What if anything? If I remember everything in my childhood and those other parents? So what's wrong with that? Because then we'd know exactly what happened to you. Maybe we could even find those people and tell them that you're okay. But then they'd probably want to take me away. Molly exclaimed, almost terrified. It won't be that easy. Kathy tried to reassure her. You'll be 9 years old soon, maybe more. We don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself recently that a trial isn't a quick process. There's no way around it. Once you're 10, you can decide what kind of family you want to live with. And then maybe you'll like your birth parents better than me. No way. Pouty lips, Molly. How could you possibly know that? They abandoned me. With childish categorization, the girl retorted. Maybe not abandoned, but just lost and still cannot find. Anyway, I'm used to you, and to my brothers, and to my sister. I've been trying hard not to remember anything for a long time now so that Molly couldn't find the right words. Kathy understood her perfectly well enough not to be faced with this impossible choice. After all, she probably loved her real parents too, and if she remembered them, the feelings might return. But her new family was already practically her own. Listen, as gently as possible, Kathy said. You may think there are only 2 options, but there are many more. If we happen to find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You can visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often. I'm sure whoever these people are, they love you. And once they realize it's better for you, they won't stop you from doing it. Molly rounded her eyes. It seemed that such an option did not occur to her at all, but now her thoughts flowed in that direction. And the girl calmed down a little, realizing that everything is not as hopeless as she imagined it. Unfortunately, Kathy could not say the same about herself. She was not at all sure of the justice of her own soothing words. It is not known how long the conversation would have continued, or where it would have led in the end, had it not been interrupted, rather unceremoniously. A man dressed in the uniform of an amusement park employee approached them. He had a broom in his hands and did not look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. Hello, I'd apologize, but your daughter looked very familiar. Isn't that Lisa by any chance? When she heard that name, the girl perked up. From the outside, she was like a lost dog who in a casual conversation of strangers heard her name. She began to stare intently at the janitor, as if remembering whether she had not met him before. You see, what's the matter? Carefully choosing her words, Kathy replied, We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that it is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She was wandering around in the street at a very unchildlike time and remembered absolutely nothing of her past and unfortunately still doesn't to this day. If you really know her, 3 years ago, stunned, exclaimed the janitor. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's when I and anyone else last saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is uncanny. Tell me everything from the beginning, Kathy suggested. While the janitor sighed and collected his thoughts, the children on the Ferris wheel returned. Michael, however, realized from the look on their mother's face that something serious was going on and that it was not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger ones to something and then gently led them to the new attraction. They used to come here a lot, you see. The girl's family, father, mother, and little girl. The janitor began at last. They used to come here almost every week, and then they disappeared. But I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe they found another park they liked better? Or something. That's when the amusement arcades started sprouting up all over the city like mushrooms after a rainstorm. And then what? Molly asked, listening to him as if mesmerized. And then I saw an ad in the paper that the girl was missing. The parents offered a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found her. Do you have, I don't know, a copy of that paper? With a mixture of fear and hope, Kathy asked. There's no newspaper left. The janitor replied, but if you are interested in the contacts of these people, I kept them just in case. What if I see or hear something? Digging a little in his pocket, he took out an old push-button phone, found the right number, and dictated it to Kathy. Wouldn't it be nice if you were Lisa? He said one last thing to Molly. Her parents, as far as I could see, were very fond of her. Both Molly and Kathy returned home in a strangely agitated state. Perhaps the solution to the mystery that had plagued them, both for 3 years now, was right in their hands. But neither of them knew where its discovery would lead. The shrewd Michael, of course, noticed that something was amiss, but he didn't ask any questions. On the contrary, he carefully diverted the attention of Jenna and Mason so that they wouldn't pester him. Kathy spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, dialing the cherished number, then quickly resetting it before the call could go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. It was just that she had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she did take that decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few beeps, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, said Kathy. Then she exhaled sharply and continued. My name is Kathy. I'm calling about your daughter who went missing about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutrally friendly tone of the caller changed immediately. The man was obviously stunned by what he was hearing and had no idea how to react. Whether to rejoice, whether to be indignant, whether to be frightened. What information could this strange woman be telling him? You know what this is about. There is some possibility that she has been in my care all this time and was recently adopted by me. I can't say for sure, as the girl had lost her memory for some reason and had no idea of her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up, but a few days ago, she seemed to be recognized by the janitor at the amusement park. I think you and I should meet and talk things over. The man replied gruffly. You're right, but I'd prefer the first meeting to take place without the girl. Why bother her and you unnecessarily? I agree, he replied. Only a few hours had passed when Kathy, terribly worried, walked into one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. Perhaps he was about 10 years older than she was, which did not diminish his beauty. Even in such an environment, the woman could not help noting that he looked just great. Hello again, she said, taking a seat across from him. He nodded silently. Either he didn't want to say anything, or he just couldn't. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and put it on the table and carefully moved it to his interlocutor. She, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Molly. Opening the folder, Kathy found that the stranger had the same thing on his mind as she had. He had brought several pictures of his daughter, apparently taken shortly before her disappearance at the very same amusement park. In one of the pictures, she posed in the pink dress she had been wearing the night the woman had found her on the street. There could be no doubt. Molly was the one in the image. Kathy had no pictures of the girl from the same period, only the most recent pictures, taken on a recently acquired cheap camera, bought out of hand on one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man apparently recognized his daughter unmistakably. "It's Lisa," he whispered. "My God, she's alive, and as far as I know, perfectly healthy, except for the memory loss. I'm afraid it's true that I had no way of providing the standard of living to which she was accustomed, but the alternative was an orphanage, and I felt that even my modest 2-room apartment on the outskirts was better than that." The man fell into silence again. Kathy did not hurry him. She understood roughly what kind of storm was going on in this man's soul. At last it subsided a little, and he was able to put words into sentences. The first thing he said came out of the blue. "I never introduced myself. I'm Charles. Nice to meet you." Kathy replied in a casual way. "Yeah." He hesitated. "I'm sorry. I'm in a bit of a state of shock right now. But anyway, I have to thank you for taking my little girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite some time, but apparently they've separated from you somehow." Cautiously she began. "You, I understand, mostly gave ads in newspapers, and I placed them on the internet." "I didn't even think about the internet," Charles sighed. "And no one told me. Although I've always been told I'm too old-fashioned, especially for my age. Did you report it to the police?" "I did, of course." He sighed, "but they couldn't find anything." "That's strange, because the first thing I did was go to the police. I was told by a police officer at the time that there was nothing they could do." "Really? I didn't know her name, and I guess they needed to check through their channels. Speaking of which," Charles darkened visibly, "did you say she'd lost her memory?" "Unfortunately, yes. I took her to the doctors, and there was nothing they could do. It's true that when we were in that very park, it was as if she began to vaguely recognize the place. Maybe if she sees you, it'll trigger the rest of her memories. I'd like to believe that." Charles said with another heavy sigh. "Only, you see, there's another problem." "What do you mean?" "You see, the girl has lived in our family like a family member. She became very attached to me, and perhaps more importantly, to my children. And I will, pardon my harshness, insist that they continue to communicate. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in. You're not rich, are you?" Charles suddenly clarified. "I'm not ashamed of it, and I can assure you that Molly, excuse me, Lisa, gets everything she needs to live." "Yeah, that's not what I'm getting at," he said. "It's just that I think I have an offer for you that will satisfy all parties. Unless, of course, you value your job too much." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, you see, I'm a single busy man, and I'm not sure I can devote the time I need to my child. You see, after everything that's happened, I've been very busy. I have a big mansion in the suburbs. Why don't you move in with the kids? You'll be a live-in nanny. Don't worry about school. You can send your kids there with your own driver. By the way, there's an upscale institution just down the street. I think we can place not only Lisa, but her new siblings as well. I thought you said you had several siblings." 3. Kathy confirmed it, "and 2 of them are due to start school this year. So you're in." "It's a very tempting offer." Kathy replied thoughtfully. "There's just one thing I don't understand. That janitor in the parks said that you always came there in threes. Where is your wife?" Charles lowered his eyes to the table, but Kathy saw tears glisten treacherously in them. Only now did she realize how stupid and tactless her question had been. They had lost a child. Perhaps they had thought the girl was dead. There was no telling what could happen to a mother under such circumstances. "You see," said Charles, quite quickly getting over his emotions. "Lisa was a late baby, a very long-awaited and beloved child. My wife and I wanted a big family, but it didn't work out for a long time. And then finally, our daughter came along. The doctors said that the second birth the body simply could not withstand. And then our only daughter disappeared. And now she's found. Ah, my poor wife was only a few months away from that moment. She got sick right after Lisa went missing. And now she's gone. I'm sorry. Kathy said quietly, I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass in front of him. They sat in awkward silence for a few long minutes, and then, wanting to change the subject to something less painful, they began to discuss the details of the move and Molly and Lisa's meeting with her birth father. As a result, Kathy returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children took the move to the huge mansion as a magical adventure. Even Michael, always reserved and serious, was almost jumping for joy. Molly alone showed no signs of happiness. She still didn't remember her father, and she was afraid to meet him. She was also visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. Now, I don't remember her. She said Kathy, and I'm not even sad. But if I did, I'd probably be very sad. That's why I chose to tell you now, so you'd be ready when you remember. The woman answered her. It took another 2 weeks before the family was completely ready to move. And then finally, the day came when Molly Lisa was to meet her birth daddy. All the participants and witnesses of this event, except for little Jenna and Mason, were terribly worried. Even Michael was visibly worried about his sister. Charles organized the transportation of things, and for the family sent his personal driver. All along the way, the girl was on pins and needles, fidgeting, bouncing, and unable to concentrate on anything. However, when they drove out of town, she suddenly froze, looking out the window, as if recognizing the scenery flying outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she shrieked loudly. Charles was no less worried than his daughter, waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl got out of the car and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father started to move forward, but stopped and eventually stayed where he was, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She walked up to him and said in a half-questioning tone, "Daddy?" "Lisa, daughter, do you remember me?" It was evident that he was restraining his desire to hug the child so as not to frighten her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than a strange uncle to her now. Even though she had been informed that he was her father, she probably didn't remember or feel it. "Vague," said the girl. "It's like I'm remembering something, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just making it up in general." "Yeah," and unable to withstand the heat of emotion, she cried. Kathy and Michael ran up to her and wrapped her in a big hug. "It's okay," said her foster mother. "It's okay, daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed to Charles. He, however, did not think to take any action, realizing what a difficult situation they all were in. He turned abruptly and walked into the house, gesturing for the new residents to follow him. The family had already been living in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory didn't even think of recovering. From time to time, she seemed to recall some fragments, but she could not understand whether it was true or a figment of her imagination. Finally, Charles and Kathy decided that it was time to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card from a private clinic that had once been left for her by one of the doctors at the city hospital. Charles could afford to pay for the services of its specialists, and Molly Lisa began to visit this institution regularly. "Don't expect immediate results," one of the doctors warned them. "It can take many months or even years to regain your memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a traumatic memory. Do you think she suffered some kind of trauma?" Charles asked worriedly. I mean psychological trauma. The doctor explained. No physical injuries were found in our examination, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she had time to decide she was never coming home again. A defense mechanism of sorts, if you will, and now we have to convince her brain that it doesn't need it anymore. That night, after putting the children to bed, Kathy knocked on Charles' room. He was sitting at his desk writing something in a thick notebook. Do you need something? He asked politely. Charles, I've been meaning to ask you something, but I've been hesitating. Can you tell me how Lisa disappeared? Call her by her usual name if you like. She doesn't respond to Lisa anyway, and it's not certain that she ever will. As for the circumstances of her disappearance, I don't really know much about it. My wife and I put her to bed that evening, and in the morning she was gone. We searched the house and the neighborhood, but found nothing. There were no security cameras either at our place or on the road, but we didn't find any sign of intruders in the house. It's as if she left of her own accord, but she had no reason, as far as I can see, to do so. Not to my knowledge, no, Charles answered. 6 months of treatment at the clinic have passed, and it has finally yielded its first results, and most happily for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It came to light in the early morning when a pleased Molly Lisa ran down the stairs to the living room where Charles was having breakfast and embraced him in her arms. This, of course, in no way canceled her love and affection for her new family as well. It was only now that she was truly happy that they all lived in one spacious house. From then on, she began to answer to both her names. And when it was time for her to get a passport, she insisted that they both be registered there. From that day on, her memory gradually returned to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, the mother of the neighbor children with whom she liked to play. By the time she was 14, she remembered literally everything but one thing. What exactly had happened the day she'd gone missing, and how she'd managed to end up on the other side of town. It wasn't until another 2 years later that those memories began to come back to her as well. Not at once very smoothly, at first in the form of some vague images that came mostly in dreams. But gradually they became clearer and clearer until, finally, not formed into one coherent picture. And it was then that Molly Lisa finally managed to tell everything to her parents. The solution was ridiculously simple and trivial. I went to get the cat, she said. What kitty? Kathy was surprised. A beautiful white one. He was walking in our yard, and I couldn't sleep, so I watched him from the window. And then he left the yard, and I wondered where he was going. So I climbed out the window. My room was on the first floor. I followed him. I thought it wouldn't be far. I'd just take one look. I came out of the courtyard, and he was gone. I went one way. I tried to look the other, but he was nowhere to be found. He must have run off somewhere to do his cat business, or maybe he was just walking around and went home. I was about to, too, when I realized I wasn't going to find the cat anyway. So you just got lost? Charles was surprised. Yeah, that's how it works. And apparently, trying to get back, I started walking farther and farther away from home. By morning, I reached the city. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I figured I could take a bus. I've seen them around here. And I went the wrong way, of course. And to tell you the truth, it was probably the wrong bus. So I walked around the city for a few days and got to the other end of it, where, as I understand it, no one thought to look for me. I didn't sleep the whole time. I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't take it, and I fell asleep right on a bench in the park. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. I went wherever I was going, and then my mom met me. That's the whole story. Around the same time that Molly Lisa's memories returned, Charles and Kathy decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a few common interests. And Kathy's own children had long perceived her new husband as their father. He responded to them in the same way. Kathy fulfilled her childhood dream. Again entered the Institute at the Faculty of Economics and graduated with a red diploma. After that, her husband was happy to hire her at his company. The woman sold her second apartment and paid off Benjamin for his half of the living space. So they lived as a big, friendly family in a huge mansion, which was now theirs in common. As a memento of her adventures, Molly Lisa brought a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment.
Subscribe and click the bell.
I hope you're ready. After all, today we are going to plunge into the world of tropical jungle wildlife and the home of some of the most dangerous animals on the planet, announced the guide and left the stage. The music played again on deck, and all the passengers went about their business. There was an hour left until arrival at the pier. Some were already on a low start and waiting at the exit from the ship. Some were still having fun and humming their champagne. There were also those who were cutting themselves into cards the whole way, not paying attention to everything else. There were a lot of different people here. They were all on their way to West Africa on the coast of tropical Cameroon. But there was one thing that united all these very different passengers. They all wanted to capture the beauty of the tropical jungle and show off to their friends as soon as possible about what a mysterious and beautiful place they had traveled to. Jacob stood on the bow of the ship and watched how fast this vessel was approaching the pretty coastline. He was a photographer. This occupation was by no means his official job. However, he enjoyed photography very much. He came from Poland and wanted to add some exoticism to his boring life. He worked in a stuffy office, an ordinary manager, but always dreamed of turning his hobby into a real job, bringing good income. The guy often arranged photo shoots for a low price, attracting clients. He was also at different celebrations, weddings, birthdays, graduations, and even funerals. For him, photography was a kind of magic, the ability to stop time in moments to capture. He felt almost like God. Those happy or, on the contrary, sad faces remained forever on the film of his camera. Not many colleagues, friends, and acquaintances were ready to appreciate his hobby. Many times he heard such phrases as, "Oh, what's so hard to click, and that's it. I do not understand why you take money." But Jacob did not give up. He knew that someday he would become a very famous photographer. All he had to do was try. After all, it's not just a click of the camera. You had to find the right lighting angle. And of course, the skill of dexterity had to be present too. Otherwise, how can you capture the laughter of a child who only cries all the time or the moments of real happiness? When a girl finally gets married, each moment must be able to capture, and this is a skill few people have. Jacob was sure of his success, so he went on this cruise, having saved part of the necessary amount of money by hard office labor. It is here in the rainforest. Their boundless ocean could make gorgeous shots that would immediately make him famous. So he thought, so dreamed. Finally, the ship started, came to develop towards the shore. Most of the guests watched the action with admiration, and some did not care. Sometimes the question was why people with such sour faces went on this trip. Although the answer was obvious, they were just tired. After all, the liner had traveled to this place for many days and nights. And even though there were all the amenities, huge swimming pools, restaurants, large cabins, many passengers were really suffering from not being able to set foot on solid land. They could have taken an airplane. But this particular unforgettable excursion involved traveling on a liner. The tour company was highly publicized and attracted the attention of many people. Everyone wanted to see the beauty of the tropical jungle and, of course, to ride on a real ocean liner. They arrived at a place called Buda. There were many hotels by the sea. This is where the tourists were supposed to check in. A wide gangway was fed to the exit. People immediately rushed to get down on solid ground, and in a minute a traffic jam was formed. Jacob was in no hurry to get off, so he did not even enter the crowd. He preferred to enjoy the seascape for a few more minutes. He thought about how endless this ocean is, and how small he was in this boundless expanse. He was brought out of his thoughts by a man's voice behind Sir. "It's time to go," the sailor said. Jacob nodded and followed the man. He understood their language, but he could not speak it himself. He even tried to learn the language once. He signed up for courses, went, but then his work came up. And after a month, he didn't even remember to study. Now, even though he knew a couple dozen basic words in the language, it was impossible to speak it, of course. But the very speech of foreigners was understandable to him, though with some difficulty. Stepping down the gangway, he immediately smelled the aroma of some delicious spices. Jacob even closed his eyes for a moment to better feel this magical smell. When he opened them, he realized where this wonderful aroma was coming from. There were vendors standing on the wharf and beckoning tourists, showing them sacks of different spices. Jacob risked approaching one of the stalls. The guy tried to ask, "What kind of spices are these?" The natives looked at him with a silly smile and blinked. He didn't understand anything. Jacob, pointing to the bag of spices. After a while, the guy replied, finally realizing what the customer wanted from him. Jacob continued, and only then realized he was speaking English again. The kid merchant was upset, because again did not understand a word. He tried to say something to Jacob, but he was already looking the other way. He was being called out to everyone else by a woman from his tour group. "All right, the hell with you." Disgruntled Jacob skipped away and ran to his own. "You will now get into these cars and you will be taken to the hotel. There you will leave your things," explained the young girl tour guide. She was wearing long shorts, khaki color, and a white top. Jacob even got a little embarrassed when the girl looked at him with a smile. "Jacob, why are you standing there? You do not understand something?" asked the guide, approaching thoughtfully that guy. He woke up and blushed even more. "I do not." "Excuse me, where are the cars?" asked Jacob, embarrassed. The girl laughed and pointed to the side. A lot of big black SUVs were parked there. The boy nodded and ran toward them. The tourists drove through the jungle to the Marion Beach Hotel. The journey took about 20 minutes by car. While they were moving, Jacob and all the other guests admired the beauty of this rainforest. Of course, it couldn't be called untouched nature, as it was a jungle with hotels. And of course, the territory was put in order. Large animals could not be met here, but it was possible to observe interesting and exotic plants, which seemed quite ordinary to the locals. After a few minutes, the tourists finally arrived at the place, which will now be their home for 2 weeks. Jacob was taken away by the hotel staff, and he followed them along the way, observing the gorgeous landscape. The owners of this hotel had done a great job. Now Jacob understood why he had paid so much money. Although in fact, half of the cost of this excursion was paid by his parents, thus making him a birthday present. They always supported him in his endeavors, and for that, the son was very grateful to them. His parents were not particularly rich, but they saved up for this trip for a long time, so that the surprise for their son turned out to be really worthy. The grounds of the hotel were huge. There were wooden bridges that led to the rooms. The villas were built right on the water. There were palm trees, colorful flowers, and bushes planted everywhere. But of course, what struck Jacob the most was the view from the room window. It overlooked the vast ocean. The doorman put Jacob's things by the door and handed him the keys and walked out, leaving the guy alone. Jacob was ecstatic. The first thing he did was jump on their tea bed and enjoyed the stunning ocean view out the window for a long time. After a few minutes, the hotel manager knocked on his room and in English asked him to go to the restaurant where the girl tour guide was already waiting for everyone. Now the guy experienced some excitement in his chest again. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. True, it didn't help much. He liked this girl very much and wanted to make the best impression on her, so he searched his suitcase for something beautiful. However, everything that could at least a little bit suitable for the first acquaintance there was. A black jacket and pants, Of course, Jacob wouldn't put them on. He would have looked like a white crow. It was only morning, however, it was already very hot. So the guy opted for beach shorts and a shirt with palm trees. He fiddled with the mirror for a long time, and when he looked at his watch, he immediately perked up. He was already very late. So, taking only his cell phone with him, he rushed to the restaurant. The way was not long, and Jacob did not even get confused in the turns. Whether it was luck or he was just well-oriented by the signs, but he got to the meeting place almost on time. There were already 20 people seated in the restaurant. However, it was not all of them. Probably all of them were divided into groups, and Jacob almost jumped with happiness when he realized that this girl would be a tour guide in his group. "Oh, Jacob, we've been waiting for you," the girl standing on the dais greeted him with a smile. All the guests immediately turned to him, and the guy felt embarrassed again. "Please have a seat in a friendly manner," the girl said and turned to the other guests again. "So my name is Anna, and I will be your guide for the rest of our journey for all questions. Please feel free to contact me." She turned her head and winked at Jacob. The man immediately blushed, but did his best to hide it. He didn't understand why Anna was paying such attention to him. Of course, Jacob secretly hoped that something caught her eye. "Tomorrow we go to the jungle, so please dress as comfortable as possible. Everything else will be taken care of by our team," continued the guide. "And today, rest up, gain strength for our journey." Some of the guests still asked some questions, and then everyone began to disperse. Jacob was brave enough and approached Anna. He wanted to invite her to dinner at the restaurant, but something went wrong, and the guy stuttered at the first word. The girl obviously noticed this strange behavior and decided to take the initiative. "Did you want to ask me something? Friendly?" she asked. Jacob looked at her beautiful eyes and could not tear his gaze away. They were similar, like the sky or the ocean, which was a few hundred meters away from them. And Jacob wanted to swim in those eyes forever. "Jacob, are you all right already?" asked Anna. Jacob, as if struck by lightning. He woke up from that pleasant trance. "Sorry," he mumbled. "You wanted to know something?" The girl asked again. Jacob was about to offer her dinner at the restaurant, but at the last moment changed my mind. Usually girls do not like such a persistent guy, and they'd only known each other for an hour. It was urgent to think of something, and Jacob did not think of a more ingenious idea than to ask where is the bathroom. Anna looked at him in bewilderment, but tried not to show it. She pointed in the direction of the restroom, and when Jacob went there, the girl laughed softly. It was evening. Jacob has already had time to sunbathe in the sun, drink cocktails, and swim in the sea. After arriving, he was very tired, but decided to take a last look at the restaurant. His favorite song was playing there, and he really wanted to go there. Inviting Anna to the restaurant was a very good option. But Jacob decided first to get to know her better. "May I, please?" I put, and. "I think that's it. I don't like to eat when it's hot," said Jacob in English. He had practiced for a long time during the day to make this order. The waiter nodded understandingly and left. The guy looked around and immediately noticed Anna. She was sitting across the table from him and seemed to notice him. "Do you speak the language well here?" she said, smiling. The girl was drinking something from a glass. It looked like white wine. "Thank you. I tried," Jacob answered proudly. He felt like a schoolboy who was praised for a good grade. Suddenly, Anna stood up and walked over to his table. "Do you mind if I sit down?" she asked politely, standing at the table with a glass of wine. Jacob again admired the girl's clothes. The white, open dress suited her very well. "Yes, of course," smiled the guy. The girl pushed back her chair and sat down across from him. Now Jacob was again embarrassed by the gaze of this beautiful young girl. "I'm very excited to be leading the tour here. I've been to a lot of places, but I've never led a tour in Africa," shared Anna. "Do you work as a photographer?" she asked, pointing at the camera that hung on his chest. "So far only part-time," embarrassed Jacob. "And how long have you been working as a tour guide?" But Anna did not have time to answer, as on her shoulder was a heavy muscular hand of some man. The girl turned around and fake aghast, showing her delight and admiration. Jacob didn't realize what kind of scene was unfolding in front of him. But then the guy realized that all his hopes to make Anna his girlfriend collapsed because she kissed the jock on the lips. Jacob was even embarrassed by this awkward situation. After all, he thought she was flirting with him. Finally, Anna pulled away from her boyfriend and turned to Jacob. "Jacob, meet my husband Jim." The girl introduced her man. Jacob simply responded with a handshake. From his look, you could immediately understand that he was not happy with the situation. He always had bad luck with girls, and unfortunately, Anna was no exception. "Jim is one of the tourists in my group, Jacob," explained the girl to her husband. Jim only smiled strained. He also did not like that his wife sat at the table to some little familiar guy. Jacob noticed this look and hurried away under the pretext that he was very tired today. Anna once again reminded him about what time they were going to meet tomorrow, and the guy left. Bitter annoyance tormented him for the rest of the night. However, at the end, he accepted the fact that the beautiful Anna would never be his other half. He was able to fall asleep only in the morning and slept only 4 hours. At 8 o'clock, everyone was already standing outside the hotel waiting for their guide. Today, they were to go into the jungle. It was frightening and very exciting at the same time. Jacob took with him only a camera, but just in case he grabbed a lighter and a couple of paper napkins. This climate was very bad for him. Therefore, it was not impossible that he would get a runny nose. Finally, Anna came out of the hotel accompanied by 3 tall, muscular men. They were carrying many small boxes. "Greetings, ladies and gentlemen," the girl announced solemnly, approaching the group. "At last we will begin our journey. But before we go into the forest, full of dangers, we need to take the necessary equipment, as well as sign some documents." All 3 men put the boxes on the floor. One of them opened the package and took out something dirty green. Anna walked over to them and decided to comment on the contents. "So each of you will be given a special suit that will be comfortable for walking. It has special pockets for water matches, insect right, and much more. So bravely take these things on the dare, and we will go on our hike." Several people immediately ran up to the men and a line formed. All the while Jacob stood waiting for his suit, he looked at Anna, who was explaining something to one of the hikers. Jacob was still mortified. This was not his girlfriend and never would be. "Dear, don't hold up the line, please," asked the man, handing the guy things from the box. Jacob grudgingly took the gear and stepped aside to put it all on himself. Slowly, he got into the suit, putting water and the rest of the items in it. He was surprised to see a clerical knife among the gear. Why would he need it in the jungle? However, Jacob decided not to ask unnecessary questions. "Those who have received all the necessary items, come to me," Anna announced. Jacob looked in her direction. The girl stood at a table and gave each person a form. Jacob decided to find out what was written on the forms. He got in line and after a while finally came to the table. "Familiarize yourself with the document and then sign here and here," the girl explained. "It's all formalities." She tried to say friendly, but it turned out too serious, and Jacob tensed. He stepped aside to read the contract. "In case of injury, or death, I have no claims against the organizers. I am familiar with the safety rules," it said in the contract. The guy was not surprised by this paragraph. As other tourists, he often participated in sports competitions. And everywhere in all the papers there was the same warning. It was really just a formality. However, it was still a bit tense. After all, anything could happen in the jungle. But he trusted this tour company, which in its entire existence had never had any such incidents. Well, or did they just keep quiet about them? Suddenly, a red-hot thought occurred to him. Jacob approached Anna again and jabbed his pen at one of the items. "Did we talk about safety rules?" Jacob asked. He didn't care at all. He knew it was a formality. He just wanted to hear her voice one more time. The girl looked at him skeptically and then answered with a strained smile. "I will announce all the rules later." "No worries," Jacob nodded and handed over the signed contract. A few minutes later, all the documents were signed and Anna spoke again. "And so it's perfect. Now I've instructed you all, and we'll be on our way." Everyone moved as close to her as possible, like they were afraid of not hearing something. The jungle is not something you drive through. When we drove to the hotel, the girl started. "Now we are going to a truly untouched nature, the wild animal house. In this regard, I want you to make sure once again that you have all the equipment. Please keep up with the group and help each other out, if anyone needs help. And now for the most important part. I'm going to ask you all to hand in your cell phones." There was an immediate uproar after this statement. However, after a minute, Anna managed to calm everyone down and continued that all this is done for you and the jungle communication does not catch, so phones will be to you no need. If you wanted to take pictures, then I hasten to rejoice you. With us will go a professional photographer. At first, Jacob thought that the girl was talking about him, so he felt some pride and at the same time embarrassment. However, after these emotions came disappointment, when from behind Anna came Jim with a camera. "Jim will take quality pictures of you for free. Will you be satisfied?" Satisfied, announced the girl. The tourists immediately calmed down and changed their minds. All of them gladly put their gadgets in special boxes. "We are responsible for your electronics, so you cannot worry." She safely laughed Anna. "And now let's get to the most important thing." She switched to a serious tone. "Sometimes there are situations where you may get lost, but don't worry. Each of you will now be issued trackers. On them there is a special red button, pressing which you will immediately call the rescuers." The men who were holding the boxes started handing out the trackers. Jacob looked at the flimsy device with disbelief. It was definitely not protected from any exposure to water, so he had to be careful with it. When everyone had checked the equipment for the 1000th time, the campers settled into the SUVs that were taking them into the thick of it. They drove through beautiful terrain again, past other hotels. Anna was narrating their itinerary. "So," she said, "first of all, we will go to see the waterfall. It is the most mesmerizing and magical place where we will be able to take amazing pictures and, of course, make a wish." After 10 minutes, the tourists were dropped off right on the road. To the right, there was already trampled path along it. Apparently, 1,000 tourists passed by. After all, it was the most famous place of the Step Waterfall, very impressive show. For about 10 minutes, the group was going up the mountain and finally got to the right place. Jacob immediately ran to take his stunning shots, tried to choose the best location, but everyone was already crowded around, and it was impossible to get a good spot. Jim had already started taking pictures of everyone, and there was a crowd around him too. Jacob was very angry, but he still managed to find a secluded place from which he could see the waterfall very well. The guy took a few shots and was about to leave, when suddenly someone's hand touched his shoulder. He turned around in fright and saw a low Yaroslav man. Standing next to him was an equally small girl. "Is that your camera?" asked the man, pointing to the object in Jacob's hands. "Yes, mine," answered the frightened boy. "I'll take a picture of me and the girl, because this Jim is already all over the place." "I'm not a tourist photographer," indifferently replied Jacob, and was going to pass by. The men moved to the main group, but the tourist blocked his way. And at that moment, Jacob tripped on a rock and fell to the ground. To him, frightened girl ran up to him and tried to help him get up. Jacob unhappily got up from the lunatic and looked around. He dropped a bottle of water, which he opened and got angry. Picking it up, he looked around himself. His palms were muddy, his sleeves were muddy too. "What have you done?" shrieked Jacob at the pair. The girl looked at him fearfully, and the man pressed his lips together guiltily. "I'm sorry," the boy gave the man's voice. "What do I need your apology for?" The boy continued his indignation with quick steps, full of just indignation. He sprinted downstairs, where a group of him was already gathering, spotted by Anna. "Uo," she pronounced, looking at Jacob. "You're all right." "Yes, much better," sarcastically replied Jacob. The girl looked away embarrassed and continued talking to the group. "Well, everyone is gathered, which means we can go to the jungle. On the way I will tell you about the beauty of these wonderful forests. But remember, there are a lot of wild animals here, so keep the taser in your pockets with you, okay?" "Well, we're off." The tourists followed the guide, and Jacob was still turning away from the mud. Having calmed down a little, he began to catch up with the group. Before he knew it, he had caught up with the guide. "So, and here we will stop, and you can take pictures," she announced to the group, and then turned her head towards Jacob, who was no longer eager to take pictures. The boy just sat down on the nearest rock. They weren't in the thicket of the jungle yet. From here, they could still only see the waterfall now. And looking at the terrain, Jacob realized that he had sat down under a tree that was icy. Though there were similar plants everywhere here, the group once again flanked Jim, and he quickly clicked the shutter of his camera. What did Anna see in him? He was even holding the camera unprofessionally. Jacob was very indignant at this fact, suddenly sat down to him, the one he was just thinking about. "How are you?" Quietly, she asked, looking directly at him. Jacob turned his head and examined the girl. That hiking suit suited her very well, but as soon as the guy remembered her husband Jim, immediately gloomed. "It's okay," he indifferently replied, turning his head away. He looked like a hurt boy, and he realized it himself. "I was told you fell." Concerned, inquired Anna. "Yes, I fell." In the same cold tone, the boy answered. "I don't think your mood was ruined because of that." "What else could it be?" The boy muttered. The girl was silent, but Jacob knew the answer to that question. His mood had been ruined yesterday when he saw Anna's shoulder being touched. That muscular arm. Jacob had always been a very lovesick person and took any blows of fate hard. He had no experience in relationships. Girls always bypassed him. But the reason was definitely not in his appearance. The guy was quite handsome, athletic, and young. He was just too nerdy. He didn't think he was better than anyone else, but he often allowed himself to correct those whose assertion was clearly wrong. Or maybe the reason revealed itself in the fact that he was still living with his parents, though at 22 that wasn't such a shameful thing to do. Either way, whatever the real reason was, girls were still avoiding him. The group was already starting to gather again. Anna got up from the rock and walked towards them. Jacob pulled himself together and followed her. "So what you saw was still a flower. And now we are heading into the real jungle. Please be vigilant and do not defend," explained the girl guide. People followed the guide, Jacob along with them. The road was not an easy one. The path was very often very narrow and slippery. Sometimes you had to step over thick roots of plants. There were vines hanging from every step. In just a few minutes, they were able to see the first real creatures of wildlife, the monkey. Not all the tourists had time to see this monkey, because it jumped lightning fast through the trees and instantly flew over their heads. Some were upset. However, Anya assured them that this was not the purpose of their hike today. After all, they were now going to an area where tigers lived. Unfortunately, it really took a long time to get to them. But the girl guide entertained her group with the most interesting facts about the jungle. Therefore, the tourists were not so boring to wade through the thickets. Once again climbed over a fallen tree. Jacob noticed some movement. He looked around, but saw no one. But then, looking closer, he noticed the tail of a parrot, and then his own. He was sitting on a tree branch and brushing his feathers. Jacob decided not to shout to everyone about what he saw, otherwise people would scare away the cautious bird. Instead, the guy decided to take a few shots on his camera. The group walked slowly. He would definitely not lag behind. Jacob carefully, without sudden movements, took out the camera and began to look for a good angle. But he could not get it. Then the parrot hid his head behind a wing or turned around. So it was not clear what kind of bird it was. But after several unsuccessful attempts to shoot this wonderful creature, Jacob still managed to find a good position. And as soon as he clicked, the parrot immediately flew aside on another branch. The shot turned out blurry and incomprehensible, but stubborn Jacob could not allow this bird to remain unrecorded. He'd be biting his elbows for the rest of his life. So the guy approached his victim again. It flew in again. Jacob chased it again and again, and he finally got a really amazing shot. It very successfully captured the parrot in all its glory. Especially well turned out wings. If you zoom in on them, you could see them in great detail. Jacob for a minute admired this masterpiece, and then with a happy face decided to return to the line. But when he went in the direction he thought he had just come from, Jacob realized that this was definitely not where he had been and turned around in the opposite direction. Now he was confused and didn't know where to go. Any path made him doubtful. He decided to orient himself by the branches, because they were the ones he was looking at when he was chasing the parrot. Because of his excitement, he began to be overcome by heavy doubts. However, Jacob decided to listen to his intuition and went in the right direction, in his opinion. He walked for about 10 minutes, but never came to a familiar path. The guy began to get more and more worried. He began to calm himself. Maybe he simply missed the path where he should have turned. Jacob turned back, began to look, but through the huge leaves of liana plants and trees could not make out anything at all. Suddenly, he heard some kind of hissing. He was terribly alarmed. Jacob slowly turned his head, and his soul took to its heels. On a branch of a tree that was a couple of meters away, from it sat a snake, a huge snake, and it was also completely different from what he had seen once in his native forest. Jacob froze. He had read many times that when you see a snake, you should just stop and let it go, which he did. Sweat slowly dripped from his face, but not a single muscle trembled. The snake, on the other hand, hesitated for a couple minutes, and then descended from the branches to the ground and crawled past the guy with a sing-song. Jacob waited a few more minutes motionless, to be sure not to run into this deadly creature. Then he exhaled a sigh of relief, but unfortunately, being saved from the snake didn't solve his even bigger problems. He was still alone in the dense jungle, and it was still unclear where he was. Jacob walked a few more meters and came to a small clearing. It was very cozy here, if you ignore the fact that he was completely lost. The sun shone cheerfully through the crowns of trees, and its slanting golden rays fell on the emerald-thick grass. In the distance, Jacob saw a monkey deftly jumping from one liana to another, but he was no longer impressed by this sight. He panicked. His heart beat more often, his hands were sweating. Suddenly, he remembered Anna's words. Everyone will have a tracker. Press the red button, and the rescuers will come for you. The boy looked at his wrist and could not believe his eyes. The life-saving bracelet was gone. On the other hand, it was not there either. Jacob frantically searched for something in his pockets and backpack. The search was unsuccessful. Tracker was nowhere to be found. It was only after a few minutes that Jacob had an epiphany when he tripped and fell. It wasn't just water he dropped. The GPS tracker fell off my arm too. Jacob didn't even notice. Now he was left completely alone without food, water, and without the ability to call rescuers. The guy sat down on a rock and almost cried. Soon, and the day would be coming to an end. He thought, it gets dark quickly in the jungle. And indeed, the sunset was slowly drifting away. To help, Amir yelled as hard as I could. Boy. He screamed again and again until he was completely hoarse. But no matter how many times he tried, there was nothing and no one. Then he had the horrifying, but perhaps fictitious, idea of making a fire. The smoke was bound to be seen by someone. He had often seen on the news how people were found thanks to the smoke from the fire. So Jacob decided to repeat the experience. He found some dry branches lying near the trees. 10 minutes later, he himself took a whole pile. Now it was only necessary to set it on fire. Jacob found a lighter in the pocket of his jacket and brought it to the twigs. The twig lit up nicely and immediately went out. This was the first time Jacob had encountered such a problem. And finally, he realized. It was all caused by the immense humidity. The kindling here wasn't so dry, and it didn't burn well. So Jacob found some dry leaves and put them under the branches, took out a lighter and lit the leaves. A small flame engulfed the dry leaves and then spread to the branches. At first, Jacob was pleased with what he had done. However, then his luck turned away from him. When the fire had gotten hot enough, the flames suddenly spread to nearby branches and dry grass. The fire began to climb toward the larger trees. Jacob now looked on in horror as the kindling and fire was almost reaching the dense thicket. Disaster was inevitable. The guy tried to put out the flames with his jacket, but nothing helped. He began to have the most real panic. His palms were sweating. Cold sweat appeared on his body. His eyes darkened and it became difficult to breathe. His throat constricted. Just a moment more, he'd just burned to death in here, in this damn jungle. Suddenly, he heard the distinct cracking of branches behind him, under someone's heavy footsteps. Jacob turned around, hoping that he had been found. But the sight he saw frightened him even more than the fire. He recoiled and almost fell into the fire. There was a gorilla staring back at him. The animal seemed so huge. The boy just stood still. It was as if he was burrowed into the ground and was afraid to make any movement. The gorilla was not afraid of anything, including the man. It picked up some huge green leaves and began to throw them into the fire. The fire died down. Jacob timidly approached the trees and began to help. Burning picked up the wet leaves. Then the animal grunted and began to throw a handful of sand into the fire. And Jacob, overcoming the fear of this huge creature, helped him in this as well. Together, they were able to put out the fire. Jacob could not believe that all this was happening to him. To think that a wild animal helped to put out the fire that had started. But the guy still shunned the gorilla. Wild animals are unpredictable and always pose a danger. That he knew for sure, especially gorillas. These giants are very strong. And a fight, if it happens at any rate, will end in death for an unarmed man. But this gorilla didn't seem to have any intention of hurting him. It began to walk away slowly, but all the time it turned its head and made some movements with its huge long arms. Jacob could not understand what this animal wanted from him. The guy continued to stand in place and looked after the departing burn, and that as if waiting for him. And now it stopped again and looked at Jacob with a long attentive look, but the guy still did not move from his seat. He did not understand what she wanted from him. After a few minutes of such silent tactics, the gorilla moved back to Jacob. The guy was seriously startled and began to back away slowly. Again, without making any sudden movements. But the gorilla kept speeding up its step. And then Jacob so panicked that he rushed into the forest. He knew it was best not to run from animals. But now he was terrified, and running could save his life. Jacob had never been known for his speed, but now he could easily win all the school Olympics. And not only school Olympics in running, including sprints. The gorilla, not thinking long, ran after him in a huge race. After a few minutes of this frantic race, Jacob began to pant, but continued to run. After all, his life depended on it. But still the huge animal caught up with him. Suddenly the gorilla came out of a thicket and grew a furry colossus right in front of Jacob, and he ran straight into its immense figure. The boy froze and trembled with fear. But that's it. Here comes my death, he managed to think. But the gorilla rose on its hind legs, walked past the lad and poked him in the back with its heavy meal. Jacob involuntarily moved forward like a puppet led by a puppeteer. He really felt like a puppet. Then the gorilla began to push him in the back regularly, and Jacob had no choice but to go wherever she pushed him. Thus, they came back to the clearing where they had recently met. Jacob gradually realized that he was in no danger, and this monkey still just wanted to take him somewhere. The guy hoped that it would not be its ancestral home. Maybe the animal knew where the exit from the jungle was and was pushing him there. Hopefully, he thought. And so they walked side by side for quite some time. He had long since lost track of time. On the relative plain, they descended into some lowlands. Only now Jacob realized that all this time was far above sea level. However, the place where the gorilla led the guy was not at all like an exit from the jungle. On the contrary, it seemed to be the deepest part of the rainforest. And then Jacob saw many people in strange attire. He realized that it was some kind of local settlement in the middle of the jungle. Finally, an old man noticed the new arrivals. He was probably the chief. At least, so it seemed to the haggard men. To the boy this chief, as Jacob mentally dubbed him. With a proud gait, he approached the poor guy and asked him something. But Jacob did not understand a thing. This language was completely unfamiliar to him. The boy stood and looked at the leader with naive eyes. The old man repeated his question. And only now Jacob realized that this is not some unfamiliar language of the natives, but ordinary English. Apparently, from fear, He had forgotten how people speak, and it seemed that the leader asked him who he was. Jacob thought a little, and then, but terrible English with an accent to twist words, said, "I am Jacob tourist. I need a hotel. I'm lost. You help me." The leader looked at the strange stranger in bewilderment. The whole village was watching them. Who was this stranger and where did he come from? After a few minutes and a dozen questions, the old man realized that he would not get anything out of this frightened young man. This guy didn't understand anything and he couldn't even speak. The leader ordered to give him a hut and food. The young girls fussed and started running around, following orders. One of them approached Jacob, took him under the arm and led him deep into the village. The boy turned around, but the gorilla who had brought him here was nowhere to be found. For a second, he thought that he imagined it all because of the lack of water. He must have found the village by accident. The girl sat him down on a log that was used as a bench. Opposite him on the same log sat two boys, about 10, 11 years old. They were discussing something animatedly, but Jacob could not understand a word. And looking in the chassis, he realized that the improvised benches were around the fire. The guy assumed that this is where various meetings are held, and perhaps cooking food. However, the second option he immediately discarded. As soon as he saw a man who had a special table for food and a stone device that could be called a brazier. The man was already roasting something on the fire, and Jacob hoped it was food for him. This whole trip had made him very tired. He was very hungry, and he was also terribly thirsty. But the girl who accompanied him had disappeared, and he was ashamed to ask the boys for water. So Jacob decided to get water himself. Surely there must have been something like a well. The boy stood up and surveyed the area. The village was quite large. To the right and left were small houses. They were mostly all made of clay and bamboo. He passed by a cook who had a separate hut for cooking. I guess you could call it a kitchen or even a restaurant. Jacob grinned. After passing a few more cabins, he came to an uninhabited area. Further on, the jungle stretched out again. Jacob never found one. But he did hear a soft sound and a rustling. It was definitely a stream. At first, he wanted to ask one of the locals if it was possible to go there. But there was no one around, and he was so thirsty that he decided to go there. One stream could be heard very well. Clearly, it was not far away. No one would notice he was missing. Jacob walked down the small, not densely packed slope and headed for the water. The sun was already hiding behind the horizon, and the water reflected a beautiful orange sunset. The boy was very happy when he saw the crystal clear water. First, he decided to wash his face and tidy up a bit. His face was smeared with dirt, and understandably so. Jacob put out fires and then ran from a gorilla that ended up saving his life. All these events were whirling through his head. And the guy thanked God that he was able to find some civilization, if this society could be called civilized. What if they were cannibals? The thought made him break out in a cold sweat again. He tried to distract himself, washed his face, and drank the cool water greedily for a long time. She seemed like a blessing to him. The water was so pleasant that Jacob decided to take a little swim. He took off his shoes and dipped his feet into the rivulets. What happened afterward was etched in his memory forever. Sitting by the creek with his steps submerged in the cool water, he saw in the distance some floating log. Then it seemed to him to be a man lying down altogether. After a few more seconds, he saw someone's eyes on the log. Clearly not human eyes. Suddenly, Jacob realized that it was not a log at all. It was a real crocodile. The giant predator shows out of the water more and more. Quickly approached Jacob. Young man, how glued. Sat on the shore and looked at this horrifying sight. It was as if he had frozen from shock. He was pulled out of his stupor by a piercing scream. "Run, save yourself. Run, you idiot," shouted a woman's voice from behind in English. Now Jacob didn't need to be told again. Twice he tore from his seat like a good sprinter. The boy raced away from the creek back into the depths of the jungle. At this point, he didn't care where he ran. As far away from the fearsome beast as possible. The chase was on. The crocodile didn't seem to have organized. And Jacob calmed down a bit and stopped, breathing heavily. After a few minutes, the very girl who had sat him down by the fire and promised to give him a tour of the village approached him. She seemed to be the one who had saved him. She was now dressed in hunting clothes. If you could call it normal clothing, she was wearing some sort of linear, short bandage, covering everything below the waist, and the same bandage barely covering her breasts. Jacob was even a little embarrassed to see her like that. After all, in the village her clothes were more closed. "How did you even end up here?" she shouted in good Polish. Jacob was amazed. What is this? The effects of repeated shocks so affected that he began to understand the natives. "Well, I was brought by a gorilla." Embarrassedly began to answer the guy, feeling like in a bad nightmare. No, the fool is not in the village. And here by the stream the girl was angry. "I wanted a drink of water, and it seemed to me that nothing would happen. If I just took a sip of some clean water from the brook, a creek. Do you know that in this nice creek it's awfully dirty? There are dangerous animals in that part of the jungle. Only hunters are allowed in that part of the jungle. I didn't know. I just wanted to. I don't care what you wanted. I'll take you back to the village to the chief. Let him decide what to do with such an idiot." Jacob guiltily lowered his head. It seemed to him that he was a delinquent schoolboy who was reprimanded by the teacher. In the end, of course, the guy obeyed and went after the girl. This village was his only chance for salvation. "What's your name?" After a few minutes of silence, asked Jacob. The girl seemed to understand his language very well. Indifferently answered the stranger, removing leaves with a stick. "That name means something." "Well, that means," the girl said snidely. "But you don't need to know it. Say your name." "Jacob," said the guy, following her. "Jacob?" Coco interrogated. "And what does that mean?" And then the guy smiled victoriously. He had waited his whole life for such a question. It could seem that his head even climbed up from pride. "Strong," pronounced Jacob confidently and proudly. "Strong and brave." "That at the creek I did not see any manifestation of these wonderful qualities," said Coco. Jacob felt offended by such a remark. Yes, he really was not particularly strong physically, but mentally he was a very serious competitor to many potential opponents. However, no one seemed to care about that here. They had almost reached the village when suddenly Coco asked, pointing at his shoulder, "What's that you've got there?" Jacob at first didn't understand what she meant. However, then guessed what caught her attention was a camera. The guy explained. "Camera," clumsily pronounced the girl, swallows half of the sounds of the device that helps you take pictures. "Photo." "What?" Then Jacob realized that this local beauty, really very far from civilization, and really, how could she know of the existence of such a beautiful machine here in the jungle? A beautiful picture, a piece of the past that you can look at an infinite number of times, the boy explained. He felt as if he were talking to a child. The people who were far removed from such basic things were indeed like children. Even modern city children knew much more than these natives. Jacob still didn't understand why tribes like this still existed. The world has long gone far away. Progress has reached its peak, and there are still somewhere people who still roast meat on the fire. And not just shish kebab from the store, but meat that they themselves and extracted. And there was no need to say anything about education, views, politics. These people did not understand such things and, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, did not want to understand. They were happy here, away from it all. When they reached the place, Coco put him on the same log from which he had run away. The boys, on the other hand, were gone. A brief twilight came, and then abruptly, in an instant, as happens in the southern latitudes, solid darkness. After a while, Jacob finally saw in the distance, by the light of torches, Coco and the old man of the chief coming toward him. This time, the tribal leader did not waste time in English, but delivered an angry monologue in his native tongue. And Coco began to translate it into Polish. "My father is very angry at your behavior. No one leaves this village without warning. He decided to help you, thus taking responsibility for your life. Responsibility." Jacob interjected. "It is the custom. We are not often ordered to us wanderers, but if they do, we try to help them properly. We are taking you under our wing, and it is our job to keep you alive. Tell the chief I'm sorry. I was just thirsty." The girl said something to the chief, and the man listened to her glumly. He looked at Jacob incredulously. He said something to Coco and walked away, tapping his cane on the ground. The girl stepped closer to the boy and declared, "My father gave you a hut. Now I will take you to where you can eat." Jacob's eyes rounded. "That was your father? Why does that surprise you so much?" As if even insulted Coco, and then abruptly turned around and walked away, leaving the guy alone again. Jacob was extremely surprised and even discouraged. He himself did not understand why he had such a strange reaction. For some reason he thought that the old man had no one. It was surprising to see such a young girl and know that she was the daughter of a profound old man. Jacob might have assumed she was his granddaughter. But daughter, his musings were interrupted again by the appearance of Coco. "Let's go," threw the girl and took the boy's hand. She pulled him behind her, and he, like an obedient puppy, followed her. They came to a hut. It smelled of meat. Do these natives really know how to cook? The guide and the girl entered the room, and Jacob was even surprised that there was a real wooden table with wooden chairs. After all, civilization had not gone so far from them. The interior was very similar to the old Slavic hut. Only the hut itself and all the furnishings were made of bamboo. The girl sat him down at the table and left. To what? That must have been where the kitchen was. The guy once again looked around the house, the table, chairs on the wall, some herbs, honored, incomprehensible objects. Jacob didn't have time to look at everything yet, as Coco came back again with a full plate of food. What was even more striking was that the plate was clay. That meant that their pottery art was thriving as well. They have every chance of being a great community, thought the boy. The dish consisted of meat steak and some kind of very tasty sauce. In a separate cover, they served a strange cereal. "What is it?" With distrust in his voice, Jacob asked the girl. "Food," arrogantly replied Coco, sitting down across from the guy. "I understand, but what exactly is the food?" Suddenly the guy felt like an idiot. He was given a night's lodging, meat, which is clearly not given to everyone. And he's showing off. "This is meat," as she pointed her finger right at the steak, "and this is porridge. Eat it, and don't kick it. It's not every day you get a meal like this. But your father said you look very malnourished, so today you can eat something we don't eat very often." Jacob looked at the dish once more and was about to start eating, as suddenly realized that he did not even have a fork, but something like a fork. Pitifully, he asked. The girl left again for the thing and came back with a wooden spoon. She handed him this cutlery. "We eat meat with our hands," with a chuckle, she explained. "But for you guest, I'll make an exception." Jacob, of course, was a little surprised, but remembered that these people are aborigines. They live by their own rules. After a few minutes of lively eating food, Jacob still dared to ask another question. "And how do you know Polish?" "Since childhood." "Not interested," replied Coco, looking as another spoon is sent into the mouth of the guest. "And why then only you speak the language, and so well?" The girl was silent. She clearly wanted to say something, but for some reason it was hard for her to do it. "My mom and I were in a plane crash." Finally, she spoke. "When I was 5 years old, we were flying to the sea, then a terrible blow. I don't remember anything else. Once here, we didn't know what to do and finally found this village. A month later, the chief made my mother his wife. But a few years later, she died. Aya stayed here." "I'm sorry," Jacob said sympathetically. He was always afraid to fly, and apparently not in vain. "If you don't die in the crash, you'll fall prey to all sorts of predatory creatures, or starve to death." That's why Jacob was so scared when he got lost. He thought that he would stay forever in this wild place, and he would be eaten by predators or bitten by a snake, or he would just die here for nothing. After about a minute of silence, Jacob decided to speak up again. "Thank you for what?" surprised asked the girl. "For saving me from that crocodile. And for the food is not necessary to thank me." "Speak, thank your father. He saved you. I'm just running an errand. It must be hard on your father." Why did he lose his favorite wife? The girl was a little embarrassed, and then let out a small laugh. I don't think it's hard for him. Jacob. Coco giggled. He has 8 other wives, and all of them are alive and well, and his children can't even be counted. Jacob is in complete shock. Look down at him. 8 wives. He almost shouted. Yes, Jacob and all of them he loves continue to make fun of him, Coco. The guy to digest this information asked the next important question. You weren't always called Coco, were you? The girl's face darkened. It seemed that she still regretted something. No, of course not. She answered politely. It's my old name that my mother gave me, Alice. She always called me Alice. But when the chief married my mother, I was given another name for my new life. My mother changed her name too, and I was only 5 years old, so I did not resist. Everything seemed like a game to me then. So what is the significance of the name Coco? The girl smiled again, and there was no trace of her sad face. But I don't know, maybe beautiful, she said flirtatiously. But why should a name have any meaning? Do you care? A name can say a lot about a person. Why is that, I tell you? Isn't that you? Making friends with the spirits? To my people, name matters, yes, but to me it's just a bunch of letters. In confidence, I had so much fun when I was 5 with the chickens repeating Coco over and over. It's probably stupid. But at that moment, I didn't think about anything else. I said I'd be called Coco. Sounds like a really good name to me. I'm not arguing. The boy smiled. He finally finished his portion, even though he was hungry. Coco dragged him outside. Dad said to take you to your cabin, but I want to show you something. Jacob nodded and followed his mysterious mistress. By now she no longer looked like she was by the stream. She was wearing a light white dress or tunic obliged by a sash. It might even have been night. However, it was hardly their custom to walk in night attire with a stranger like Jacob, but this girl was clearly guilty. Not to all the traditions of this people she seemed free and intelligent. Jacob didn't manage to speak to the rest of the population, but he wouldn't have been able to. Only Coco spoke Polish here. And it was a great luck and a real miracle under the circumstances they came to some clearing hidden by trees. Jacob possessed a feeling as if he had fallen into a fairy tale. Everywhere flew, light and grew the most beautiful plants, which Jacob had never seen anywhere. He already wanted to take out his camera and start taking pictures of this fabulous beauty. But what stopped him? Let you show your magic thing in action later. For now, just enjoy the stars, pronounced the girl. The guy raised his head and was shocked by what he saw. Everything was dotted with a scattering, the brightest stars, myriads and myriads of sparkling lights, mysterious darkness. And such a sight is not seen much anywhere. Here the sky seemed fabulously unreal, as if he was not in the jungle, but on some other unknown planet millions of light years away from old Earth. Jacob looked, but the doll was sitting in the grass, looking upward. Her eyes reflected the entire cosmos. It was something eternal, unthinkable, unimaginable. The whole image was somehow so in harmony with untouched nature, with this impossible beauty around. She was so engrossed in the spectacle of the night sky that she didn't even notice Jacob taking her picture. The girl only heard a faint click. What did you do? Startled, she shrieked. She jumped up from her seat, but the guy just walked over to her and showed her the finished picture on the small display. His expensive camera had this feature, something Jacob was very proud of. The girl took a long and incredulous look at the image. Is that me? Coco asked with some naivety. It's you, confirmed the guy, sitting down next to her. The picture was indeed wonderful. It showed the beautiful Coco sitting surrounded by the rainforest and looking upward with her head down. And in the background, the endless black sky is studded with sprinkles of stars. This picture would sell very well, Jacob thought. Could you take more? Coco suddenly asked. The guy nodded affirmatively and put the camera in front of them, beforehand turning on the delay. After a few seconds there was a click, and then a flash, like a small lightning bolt, dazzled them, and for a moment the selfies were ready. It turned out really cute, Coco said, embarrassed. She looked at him with eyes that sparkled with happiness and delight. You'll teach me to do the same. Jacob felt a certain pride. Finally, his talent was appreciated. "I will," Jacob replied with a smile. He looked at the doll and could not take his eyes off her. She was so beautiful against the backdrop of all that fabulous nature. He wished they could sit like that for eternity, but this idyll was interrupted by a roar from the jungle. The whole fairy tale immediately evaporated, and only the menacing reality of the wild rainforest remained. "We should be worried," said Coco. They walked towards the village. On the way, the boy got a chill, but he didn't pay much attention to it. They stopped at the hut he had been given for temporary shelter. "Here you can finally rest," the girl said with a smile. "Good night." Jacob did not hide his new sympathy. His answering smile brightened up to his ears. "Sweet dreams, Coco," whispered Jacob. The girl walked off in the opposite direction. It turned out that their huts were located opposite each other. He watched her for a long time. She looked back a few times and got embarrassed. After giving her a glance, Jacob still managed to overcome himself and entered the hut. The place was as simple as the previous dude of grass on the floor. A low, huge tray of unknown purpose and a bamboo curly leg. Jacob lay down on the soft, soulful bed and immediately forgot himself with sleep. And his thoughts again carried to that clearing where he sat just now how much the girl sat motionless, again watching the stars. Jacob cautiously approached her and sat down beside her. That's how they would have sat. But Coco suddenly asked suspiciously, "Why are you lying?" "Lying?" the boy asked incredulously. "It's not her you love, it's me." The girl turned her head to him, but it was no longer Coco, but Anna. "So who do you love?" Jacob, in a sneaky way, asked the guide. The guy wanted to be here less and less. He broke into a cold sweat, then threw into a fever. "I am your love," or this worthless Coco screamed at the top of Anna's voice, turning into some unknown monster. Jacob was terribly frightened by this. He tried to run away, but his legs turned to stone and wouldn't listen to him. He stayed in one place and tried with all his might to escape from there. "You're not going anywhere," the girl whispered. "Snake." And at that moment her face was so distorted that he cried out in terror and woke up in a sweat, covered with anxious goosebumps. Jacob tried to recover his heavy breathing. This was the ultimate nightmare. He was terribly festering. His head ached terribly. It felt like it was about to split open. Jacob decided to go outside, to breathe. The images from the nightmare finally dissipated, but he still felt all his body unbearable, muscular pain. He was broken, twisted, and tormented. He didn't realize what was happening to him. The village was quiet. It looked like everyone was already asleep, however, in some huts. There was still a weak fire burning. The boy decided to sit on a log by the extinguished fire. From here he could see the stars very well. He was shaking with a small tremor, but still remembered the doll and her glowing eyes. This girl in just a few hours had managed to draw him away so much. He couldn't think of anything but her. Her beautiful blonde hair neatly braided into somewhat intricately their pigtails, bottomless eyes in which you could see the cosmos. The guy realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with that land of polished descent. Could it be that fortune finally turned the right way and he could find his happiness? But Jacob did not like to think ahead and make plans deep into the night. He made the decision to go back to bed and try to sleep, ignoring the pain in his head, which was only getting worse. He went into the cabin, but when he wanted to lie down, he realized that it wasn't his bed at all. There was already a man lying on it. As he got used to the darkness, he realized that this house was much more spacious, and there was more than one bed. Then he began to distinguish someone's silhouettes. Someone had lit a fire. And then Jacob heard a piercing scream. There were women screaming from two sides at once. They all lit their lamps. It was only then that Jacob realized that he had mixed up the huts. There were so many women and girls here, and many were completely leggy. He immediately turned away so as not to embarrass them. "Please excuse me, I seem to have mixed up the huts. I didn't mean to." The guy started to make excuses. Suddenly someone's hand touched him and then pushed him outside. He found himself on the street. Raising his head, Jacob saw Coco. She was covering herself with some sort of cloak. "What are you doing here?" She hissed at him. exactly like a recent nightmare. I told you, the guy started, but didn't finish. Here you can finally rest, the girl said with a smile. Good night. Jacob did not hide his new sympathy. His answering smile brightened up to his ears. Sweet dreams, Coco, whispered Jacob. The girl walked off in the opposite direction. It turned out that their huts were located opposite each other. He watched her for a long time. She looked back a few times and got embarrassed. After giving her a glance, Jacob still managed to overcome himself and entered the hut. The place was as simple as the previous dude of grass on the floor. A low, huge tray of unknown purpose and a bamboo curly leg. Jacob lay down on the soft, soulful bed and immediately forgot himself with sleep. And his thoughts again carried to that clearing where he sat just now. How much the girl sat motionless, again watching the stars. Jacob cautiously approached her and sat down beside her. That's how they would have sat. But Coco suddenly asked suspiciously, "Why are you lying?" "Lying?" The boy asked incredulously. "It's not her you love, it's me." The girl turned her head to him, but it was no longer Coco, but Anna. "So who do you love?" Jacob, in a sneaky way, asked the guide. The guy wanted to be here less and less. He broke into a cold sweat, then threw into a fever. "I am your love, or this worthless," Coco screamed at the top of Anna's voice, turning into some unknown monster. Jacob was terribly frightened by this. He tried to run away, but his legs turned to stone and wouldn't listen to him. He stayed in one place and tried with all his might to escape from there. "You're not going anywhere," the girl whispered. "Snake." And at that moment her face was so distorted that he cried out in terror and woke up in a sweat, covered with anxious goosebumps. Jacob tried to recover his heavy breathing. This was the ultimate nightmare. He was terribly festering. His head ached terribly. It felt like it was about to split open. Jacob decided to go outside, to breathe. The images from the nightmare finally dissipated, but he still felt all his body unbearable, muscular pain. He was broken, twisted, and tormented. He didn't realize what was happening to him. The village was quiet. It looked like everyone was already asleep, however, in some huts. There was still a weak fire burning. The boy decided to sit on a log by the extinguished fire. From here he could see the stars very well. He was shaking with a small tremor, but still remembered the doll and her glowing eyes. This girl in just a few hours had managed to draw him away so much. He couldn't think of anything but her. Her beautiful blonde hair neatly braided into somewhat intricately their pigtails, bottomless eyes in which you could see the cosmos. The guy realized that he had fallen head over heels in love with that land of polished descent. Could it be that fortune finally turned the right way and he could find his happiness? But Jacob did not like to think ahead and make plans deep into the night. He made the decision to go back to bed and try to sleep, ignoring the pain in his head, which was only getting worse. He went into the cabin, but when he wanted to lie down, he realized that it wasn't his bed at all. There was already a man lying on it. As he got used to the darkness, he realized that this house was much more spacious, and there was more than one bed. Then he began to distinguish someone's silhouettes. Someone had lit a fire. And then Jacob heard a piercing scream. There were women screaming from two sides at once. They all lit their lamps. It was only then that Jacob realized that he had mixed up the huts. There were so many women and girls here, and many were completely leggy. He immediately turned away so as not to embarrass them. "Please excuse me, I seem to have mixed up the huts. I didn't mean to." The guy started to make excuses. Suddenly someone's hand touched him and then pushed him outside. He found himself on the street. Raising his head, Jacob saw Coco. She was covering herself with some sort of cloak. "What are you doing here?" She hissed at him. Exactly like a recent nightmare. "I told you," the guy started, but didn't finish. Something twitched in his right leg. An unbearable pain shot through his body, and he collapsed to the ground. "What's the matter with you?" The girl was frightened. "Stop making a fool of yourself. Get up and go to your hut." But Jacob could not move an arm or a leg. He fell into a kind of paralysis. Every movement gave him terrible pain. Coming to his senses a little, he considered, or rather fumbled for, the huge holes in his hands as he examined them. Coco touched his forehead. "You're burning up," she whispered and dashed off. She had only been gone a minute. But for Jacob, that minute felt like an eternity. His hands were shaking. Every muscle in her body whimpered, her skin ached, and purple spots appeared on her arms. Finally, Coco came back with her. There was some other woman. They took him under their arms and carried him to the opposite hut. His hut he only woke up when they threw him on a bed and rubbed him with cold water. Aya brought her leaves for both the rack and the water. Commanded Coco to her companion, and the herbs we gathered last full moon. While saying this, Coco placed a wet cloth on Jacob's forehead. "What's wrong with me?" Jacob could barely manage to ask. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "You have tropical fever," completely calmly said Coco. "It's common here for newcomers." "I'll live. It's the fever my mother died of," Coco said mournfully. "But I'll do everything I can to make you well. The first few hours are the hardest. You'll be nauseous, achy, twisted. And in general, you'll be in terrible pain. But I know a medicine that will help you, so just bear with me." About 5 minutes passed in silence. Finally, her friend returned with a basket of herbs. They plowed on quite well. However, the last thing that bothered Jacob now was the taste and smell of coca. Taking that basket, she began to throw something into a clay-black pot. Then she stirred that mixture with a spoon. It was getting worse by the second. He was living nonstop. Coco's handmaidens, Aya, kept sighing and looking sympathetically at the guy. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Coco got the medicine mixture she needed. She transferred the contents of the pot into a glass and gave it to Jacob. "Drink," she commanded. Bottoms up. The boy didn't have to be coaxed for long. In 10 seconds, the entire glass was emptied. "Now we just have to wait," Coco said thoughtfully. "Aya, can you go to bed? I'll stay to watch him." "But Coco, our father is uncertain," said Aya. "Our father is already asleep, and you should go." Aya replied Coco stiffly. She obeyed the order and left. Several hours passed. During all this time, Jacob experienced every kind of pain known in the world. First, he had a fever. Then his whole body shook with a terrible cold. He was turned inside out. His brain seemed to explode and boil in his head, and his arms and legs were in such pain as if they were being twisted out of his body without anesthesia. And all the while Coco sat beside him. She didn't move a step away. In her eyes read sincere sympathy. At one point, when Jacob once again began to choke, he asked, addressing himself, not knowing to whom, "Anna, tell me the truth. I'm about to die. I will do everything possible to prevent this from happening." With a sigh, his volunteer nurse replied, "Most likely, you will recover. This decoction will help you. It helps almost everyone. You'll feel better." The girl was right. After several hours of agony just before dawn, Jacob felt much better. The fever had gone down, the cramps had stopped. Of course, the muscles were still aching. However, it was already a tolerable pain. In the morning, the guy fell asleep with the normal sleep of convalescence. Up to this point, as it was with him, he was awakened by a horrible noise that grew louder by the second. The door fell away and a menacing chief came in, shouting something in his own language. Of course, Jacob didn't understand a word of it. The boy had just woken up, and his sleepy mind did not yet understand what was going on. The chief pointed his index finger at Jacob. He was frightened and moved to the wall. 2 muscular natives entered the hut and lifted him from the bed. Jacob tried to resist, but all was unsuccessful. The men dragged him down the street. Dirt and sand stained him all over and all over again like the day before. Jacob was still feeling rather ill. Of course, he was no longer dying like the night before, but his head still split open in pain. The guy was tied to a tall wooden pole. He punctured himself at first, but his body completely, and without 2 lived strong ropes. Only now Jacob realized that he was in the center of the village by the very fire around which the logs were standing. The lad had not noticed this pillar. Yesterday, a lot of people began to gather around it. They all looked at him with anger. "Yesterday, you stranger defamed the honorable names of my wives and daughters. the chieftain said loudly. "And for that you paid with your life." The chief came as close to the boy as he could, hooked his cane in Jacob's chest, and almost whispered said in English, "We were kind to you, and you turned out to be a snake." After these words, the man turned around and walked away. The others followed his example. Jacob was left alone with himself. The young man looked around. On one of the neighboring poles hung the skeleton of a man. The boy was horrified. Did he really get into the lair of the ogres? God, how many things can happen to a man in 2 days? And what's he in for? Why? He began to mentally feel sorry for himself and fell into a real despair. He was well aware that the chances of rescue were now slim to none. But why had they done this to him? To this question he had no intelligible answer. The mutterings of the chief did not count. Where's Coco? Why hadn't she come to his aid? He was beginning to get a bad headache again, and thirsty on top of it. The sun was at the very horizon, and it was scorching and so splitting his head. It was probably around noon by now. Jacob could feel the sweat running down his body and covering his eyes. His itching and muscle aches started again. It was a terrible torment, for the guy couldn't move a single muscle. The only thing he cared about was where Coco had gone. There were a lot of related questions. Had she abandoned him in such a dire situation? Why had she saved his life yesterday if she realized that in the morning he would be tied to the damn pole? There were no answers, of course, and the thirst tormented him more and more. So did the flies and blinders that periodically landed on his fleshy body and bit the unfortunate man. Soon the sufferer's lips were shooting and burning as if on fire. He badly needed water, plain water, please. But when people passed by the pole to his cries for help, no one paid the slightest attention, and certainly no one rushed to bring him water. On the contrary, they stopped, pointed their fingers at him and laughed. Surely the leader must have let them know that this foreigner was a horrible person who didn't deserve to live. Possessing a well-developed sense of humor, the guy even laughed at his stupid death. He could have drowned on the boat, could have died in the jaws of a crocodile, or just lost forever in the jungle. Could have suffered from the deadly embrace of a gorilla. He could have died of tropical fever, but instead he's hanging. Now on that damn pole like a Christian martyr. Yes, Mrs. Fortune was clearly not on his side. After some more time, Jacob began to lose consciousness. Weak from the recent fever, exhausted by the past events and the hot sun, deprived of the ability to move suffering from thirst, he fell more and more often, either into sleep or into delirium. In rare intervals of consciousness, the boy realized where he was and realized that he had not long to suffer. Without water, he would last another couple of hours at most. But suddenly, Jacob saw with the corner of his eye Aya passing by. She was carrying 2 buckets of water, and she was clearly struggling. The guy tried to shout to her, but from behind your voice came out only pitifully and squeak. The girl turned around. In her eyes read sympathy. However, she could not do anything and was about to leave. But Jacob tried to stop her, gathering all his last strength. Aya, simple young man. The girl looked around suspiciously. There was no one on the street. Then she cautiously approached the pole on which the guy was hanging. Please give me some water, Jacob asked. Aya looked around again to make sure no one was following her. She picked up some sort of dirty clay vessel, lying in the dust. Someone must have left it here a long time ago and splashed water from a bucket into it, brought the vessel to Jacob's lips, and the boy greedily took a sip of water. Now this liquid seemed to him the most delicious in the world. Jacob drank the entire vessel in a matter of seconds. He did not even have time to thank Aya. She immediately ran away. Probably she would be very hurt too, if the people of the tribe found out that she had helped their nephew. Jacob was feeling much better now. The sun wasn't so scorching anymore. The case drew closer to evening, but the fever continued to torment the lad. It seemed that the potion Coco had given him was only effective for a certain amount of time. He realized that his new fate was no better than his old one. He was dying again, only now not from the thirst of a tropical disease. Jacob remembered his parents, his cousin, and cried. Now he will never see them again. He was lucky to get here in this damn jungle. Why did he have to go on this vile journey? If each have stayed home, everything would have been all right. Night fell. The boy had already begun to pray to all known gods for death. His head split open his muscles. His body was cramping, and his arms and legs were covered with holes. "When will this hell end?" screamed the boy in despair. He screamed and howled like a wild animal, but no one even came near him. At some point, coming to my senses from forgetting, I discovered that it was already night. The moon was shining very brightly. The silence, breaking mine, only by the rare cries of forest creatures drove me crazy. Jacob moaned quietly in pain. Suddenly, the young man heard some kind of crunch. At first, it seemed to him in a painful delirium that this terrible monster was coming to devour him. But in a few minutes, Coco appeared at the pillar. She looked very depressed and tired. The girl stopped near the unfortunate prisoner and looked at him sadly. "Coco, you have come for me. You will save me." Gasping with joy, wheezed Jacob, but she gave him a judgmental look. "Shut up," she whispered. The boy immediately shut his mouth. Now he really hoped no one had heard his joyful wheezes. Coco walked over to the pole and began to tie the ropes one by one. Jacob's legs came free first, then his arms as well. Freed from the restraints, he collapsed to the ground, limbs so used up that they simply refused to work. "Poetry after me," whispered the girl. The boy did not hesitate. He strained all his will and crawled after his savior nice. So they passed several huts, trying to keep in the darkest places. Suddenly, a man appeared in the distance. The girl pushed the boy with her foot, pushing him into some dark prologue between the two wives. She herself, too, dived in after him. They lurched, trying not even to breathe. A man in hunting clothes walked past them. On his back hung the bow, and in his hands he carried the carcass of a rather large animal. Fortunately, he was so happy with his prey that he paid no attention to the couple. When the man finally disappeared, Coco peered around the corner to survey the situation. No one was there. "Let's go in a whisper," she said. Finally, they left the village and came to a large clearing. It was similar to the one he had sat on the night before last, looking up at the stars. There was more brush and no water nearby. It was probably the most common of the jungle. Jacob was weak and shaking with sickness and fear. Here he was also very uneasy. Suddenly, the village would discover the missing and give chase. But the young man hoped that Coco knew what he was doing. Suddenly, something very strange happened. The girl clapped her hands, made an incomprehensible guttural sound, and then stomped 3 times on the ground. "What are you doing?" Jacob was indignant. "We're about to be heard." But the girl paid no attention to his protests and continued the same actions. 2 claps, a strange sound, stomping feet. 2 claps, stomping feet. 2 claps, stomping feet. After a while, horrifying sounds were heard. Jacob realized that some large animal was running straight at them. He folded himself with fright. Again he thought that his death had come. His exhausted mind refused to think straight. He was about to run. He jerked. But what stopped him? "Jacob, just trusted me," softly said the girl. Soothingly, and the tone in which she said those words worked on Jacob. He stopped and followed the girl's example. She waited. There was confidence in her gaze. Finally, someone Jacob did not expect to see came into the clearing. It was the same gorilla that had brought him to the village the day before yesterday. Or maybe it was another one. The hell of it. "Hello, Bamboo," gently said Coco, stroking low forehead of the animal. The huge beast bowed obediently to her as if she were its queen. The feeling between them was barely perceptible to outsiders. A strong bond was burning, clearly very attached to this girl. "Just like I thought Jacob was." "Do you know him?" surprised asked the young man. The girl tore her gaze away from the animal and turned to Jacob. "Yes, this is my best friend, Bamboo. We've known each other since childhood." Coco smiled. "Come, I'll tell the story." On the way, she said something quietly to Bamboo, and he easily, like a feather, picked up Jacob and put him on his powerful shoulders. "Now we're going to be walking for a long time," Coco said businesslike. "Try not to faint. Here, drink this, it will give you strength." She held out to him a vessel made of a noisy, unknown Jacob at a large plant fruit. "Drink it," almost commanded Coco. Jacob took a sip of the liquid contents of the vessel. It turned out to be quite pleasant to the taste, gave off herbs and as if honey. However, now he would drink anything to hold out and survive. By the way, to what limit would he have to hold out? He must have asked that question out loud, because Coco answered him, "We're heading for the coast." "Hold on, darling." She told him the story of how she had once met her furry friend in this jungle. Then, in his half-delirium, the boy could only catch bits and pieces of it. But then, a few years later, he remembered everything he had heard on that distant, almost fantastical night, and wrote it down to preserve it forever. "Coco, let's go," shouted Aya, putting on her bow. "We won't catch any animals because of you." Doll is in her leather hunting bag. "I can't find the bracelet." Sadly, she said. "You will. Then we'll go already." "You don't understand, it's Mom's bracelet. It brought her luck. I never go hunting without it." "Coco, if we don't go into the woods right now, my father will make bags out of us instead of crocodile." Coco sighed and walked out of the hut. Her sister was completely right. We can still live without the bracelet, but not without clothes and food. "Okay, let's have a bow already," asked someone handed her a weapon, and the girls went into the forest. "Father said to pick more berries, so the animals today will not touch almost," said Aya. Doll only nodded. Her mood was very spoiled by the missing bracelet. It was the only thing she had gotten from her mother after she was gone. Everything had changed. It was how he had started living on his own. Now there was no longer a person to answer for her actions. 2 hours passed. The girls picked a lot of berries and loaded them into special cloth bags that were fastened around their necks. It was very convenient to walk with them on the mountainous terrain. They were already walking a few miles away from the village and suddenly heard a terrible cry. Aya got into a fighting stance and prepared her bow. "Someone's coming at us. Get ready to shoot." Aya whispered loudly to her sister. They had already drawn their arrows, and as soon as the predator appeared on the horizon, they fired. Then it became clear that it was a gorilla, and it was advancing towards them at a great leap. But its wounds were mortal, and its strength was running out. At last, the mortally wounded beast collapsed. The girls gingerly approached it and examined it. The gorilla was not yet dead. It was sighing heavily. Careful noticed an oddity in its behavior. The gorilla was hiding something in its furry paws. Examining the body more closely, the girls saw deep wounds. Clearly not shot. They looked like bites. "Aya, come here." She called out to her sister. She walked over to Coco. "These are teeth marks." Aya said thoughtfully, "It looks like this gorilla was attacked." And at that moment, they heard a terrible growl. They turned around and saw a huge female leopard behind them. Aya immediately started shooting at the animal. Doll grabbed her spear. The wounded leopard lunged at Aya, and as soon as it did, Doll deftly impaled the beast with the sharp spear. When the girls had recovered from the shock, Coco made a stunning conclusion. "So this gorilla didn't mean to attack us. It was fleeing." Suddenly, the sisters heard a thin cry. At first, they didn't realize where it was coming from. It was somewhere very close by. Then they realized that the sounds came from the gorilla, or rather from what it was holding in its paws. The girls looked at each other. Coco cautiously approached the animal with force, pulled her limbs apart, and pulled out a cub quite small. "Oh my God," was all Aya could utter as Coco held the creature and cried. The mother had saved him from the leopard, and we had killed her. There was silence. No one could say a word. "What have we done?" broke the sepulchral silence. "I'll never forgive myself for this." "Coco, we didn't know. I'll take him with me," the girl suddenly declared. Aya looked at her in surprise. "What are you talking about?" She was indignant. "Father won't allow you to keep him in the village. It could become dangerous when it grows up. It's a wild animal, Coco. I killed his mother, and now I have to take care of him. Didn't they teach you to help our lesser brothers? I don't know what you were taught, where you were born, but this is not our brother here. He'll grow up to be an animal as dangerous as his mother, and then destroy the whole village. I won't let you take him with you. Let's see what father has to say about that." Coco said decisively and put the baby in her sinus. When they arrived at the village, they were already greeted by a crowd of people, The sisters had not been gone long enough, for the villagers were already starting to worry. "Where have you been?" formidably asked the chief. Aya stepped forward and told them what had happened, but did not mention the fact that they had found a baby gorilla. "I am very sorry to hear that," stated the chief, "but I am glad you are alive. Take the berries you have picked, and you are free to go." The girls nodded affirmatively and walked towards the general supply depot. "I didn't turn you in," Aya said as they laid out the berries. "But if you don't confess to your father, I'll tell everything myself. So do it as soon as you can. Otherwise, it will be worse. You're a great sister," Aya replied Coco sarcastically. "You're not my sister, and you never will be," Aya said and walked away. Coco almost cried at those words. It had been 10 years since her mother had been gone, and there had not been a day when she had not thought of her. It had been very hard for her. No one really understood her here, and no one would ever really love her. She's not like them. It's been a week since Coco got her pet. The girl named him Bomb. It was an unusual and made-up name by her. She fed the ox with his literal milk. He got stronger and got a little bigger. Now, I didn't communicate with Coco at all, but she didn't miss a chance to remind me that soon all secret things will be revealed. But Coco ignored her and continued to raise the poor baby. One day, the chief burst into her hut and ordered her to immediately take the gorilla to the jungle where it belonged. And Coco was severely punished. She wasn't supposed to leave the village for a week, but that didn't stop her. And on her first night, she went in search of her pet. "The Bomb," she screamed. Coco had traveled quite a distance, but still hadn't found the cub. But then she heard a sound like a baby crying again. She followed that sound and came to a small ravine. These barbarians had thrown him in where he couldn't get out on his own. He was like a small bear cub trying to climb the walls and charge, but the ground only crumbled under his weight. The nimble Coco immediately got the poor little fellow out and gave him a drink of the ample milk she had brought with her. She was sure she would find him. Her hopes were realized. She left him in a secluded cave, the entrance to which she closed with a large heavy stone, and has visited every night since. So the Bomb rose before her eyes. After a while, when the baby became active enough, she began to train him. He hit on a whistle and came on a special command. The girl clapped her hands and then drowned dolls, became a real foster mother to him. As Jacob listened to this marvelous story to the end, he yawned. He yawned, closed in the thick fur, gorilla, and said, "What a rat yours is, Aya." Doll grinned and replied, "By the way, she was the one who told the chief about you climbing into our hut." The boy's eyes rounded. He was already wishing for this most horrible death. I mean, come to think of it, even the natives have such bitches. After a while, Jacob no longer remembered how and when they finally reached the coast. At the beginning of this strange journey, Jacob still tried to perceive something, but then completely shut down. The sickness of the experience, the nightmare and the terrible pain, finally overcame him. Meanwhile, Coco and Boing had finally reached the publicized tourist beach. The beach was at its most deafening pre-dawn an hour. And of course, no one was here right now. Then the girl gathered dry leaves of twigs and set them on fire with matches she found among Jacob's things. It seemed that when the flames flared up, Jacob instantly regained consciousness. He remembered bright flashes, but he had no strength at all. The last thing the boy heard and remembered were the words "cuckoo," "hold on, my love," or was he just imagining it? In a feverish delirium, she left Jacob on the beach next to a brightly burning fire, and together with the Bomb disappeared into the jungle. A few minutes later, one of the hotel guards noticed the flames and came to see what hooligans had set it up, but saw only poor half-dead Jacob, who knew from tropical fever. The man who found him screamed in terror and immediately called for help. Other people came running. After that, Jacob passed out again. Finally, he came to himself. Only a few days later found himself lying on a narrow couch. Every muscle in his body aching, and in his head is a mess. True, the head itself no longer split open from the pain, and the hole in his arms disappeared as if they had never existed. He looked around the room. His bunk was behind a curtain of semi-transparent white curtains, and it was quite clean. There were various medical devices and medicines. There were voices, moans, and even screams coming from somewhere. Jacob realized that he was in the local hospital. Here and there behind the curtains were heard lively conversations, mumbling, snoring, or long prayers in an incomprehensible language. There were long plastic tubes reaching out to him, and the young man was afraid to touch them. After a few minutes, the curtains were pulled back by the doctor. Jacob said dark hair and a man in white. Yes, replied the boy uncertainly. How do they know my name? He thought, I'm glad you're finally awake. The doctor continued in Polish. My name is Alex. I studied in your country and know a little of the language. Your story has intrigued the whole hospital, I must say. You have tropical fever, quite common amongst newcomers to our area. Why didn't you get vaccinated before coming here? Jacob only shrugged his shoulders. He never trusted unfamiliar inoculations, and what if it would only make things worse? I hope you'll tell us how you ended up in the jungle and how you managed to survive there for almost a whole week. I don't remember, weakly answered Jacob. How did I get here? He looked fearfully at the doctor. They're not after me. You were found on the hotel beach, the doctor said. You were immediately hospitalized here at our clinic. You were delirious for days. It took us a long time to find out who you were and where you were from. We checked with the police. Finally, a woman named Anna got in touch. She was your guide on a tour group. They've been looking for you all over the department for days, but that's for later. Right now, I need to assess your condition. The doctor examined the patient's ears, throat, nose, eyes, listened to his heart and breathing, counted his pulse, measured his blood pressure. Then he moved on to his legs and arms. The guy still wasn't fully oriented in his memories and started asking questions. Tell me, where's Coco? She came here with me. I mean, did I come with her or did I come? Rode in on such a huge beast. I'm sorry. The doctor was surprised. The girl from the village. His annoyance, Jacob wrinkled his nose, seeing that he was not understood. She saved me from those awful natives. You know, they tied me to a pole and she brought me to the beach. Well, not her, but her gorilla. What was her bomb then? The doctor touched the patient's forehead. There seems to be no heat. He said thoughtfully, perhaps you should rest some more. This disease is really very difficult. You do not believe me. Jacob was offended. Like a little doctor smiled, rest, gain strength. Soon the police will come to you. And this girl is your tour guide, Anna. Anna. Jacob could not believe that he had already forgotten this girl. Now there was only one Coco in his heart. He had really fallen in love with her. She had saved his life 3 times. Imagine that. Although maybe he was just dreaming. Suddenly there was no village and it was all in his mind. In a feverish delirium, Aboriginal tribe, reasonable gorilla, crocodiles, fierce chiefs, execution on a pole, naked girls in a hut, and starry night no, cannot be such. Had the girl of his dreams turned out to be only a barren image? But he was simply not allowed to think about it properly. What was it again? Behind her was Anna, Jacob. My God, how happy I am that you are alive, she exclaimed. We've all been looking for you for days. Didn't sleep at night. She even wept and hugged him. When she saw the haggard, thinning face of her ward, you probably didn't even eat. I'm fine. Been sick with tropical fever all these days. I'm so sorry, Jacob. Please forgive me. Please don't report me to the police. Anna was crying. The guy was in some kind of trance and still did not really understand what was happening. Anna, surprised, exclaimed to the young man, Is it really you? I am, of course I am. God, how wonderful that you finally found. Jacob assumed a semi-upright position on his bunk. Anna quietly and seriously began, Jacob. I want to tell you something, and please listen to me to the end. The girl was wary. I'm listening, and Jacob began to tell from the beginning. For some reason, when he met Anna, his mind was clear. He told her everything from the moment he ran after the parrot to the torture when he almost died on the pole. Anna's eyes visibly rounded after this story. She obviously thought that the guy was still delusional. Jacob, I do not want to offend you, but cautiously said the girl. "But this disease, which you suffer from such clinical manifestations." The doctor said, "I know. You all think I'm crazy?" He turned his back to the wall and fell silent. Jacob did not believe anything anymore, not the doctor, not even himself. The reactions of the doctor and his guide sowed in him not eliminated and doubts about the plausibility of the story. But think about it, Anna told him, trying to make sense of what kind of wild gorilla could carry a man through the rainforest to the coast. Why would it do that? How would you be able to understand the language of the natives? It's unlikely that Descartes memorized Polish, that well if she was only 5 years old when she and her mother crashed. Besides, there are no natives of their tribes here for hundreds of kilometers around at all. All these statements and questions affected Jacob very much. Anna still managed to assure him that it was all just a game of his sick imagination. "Listen, Jacob," said the girl, "I realize now it is silly to assume such a thing in your condition. However, I will do it. Would you like to go out with me? After you're fully recovered, of course. Maybe we'll still have time before we leave for a date?" Jacob smiled, not believing his luck. How much he wanted to get closer to this wonderful girl. And then it was as if he woke up from the anesthesia and even switched to you. Although it was rude. "Wait, so you have Jim, right?" "Jim, he's in the past," Anna said firmly. "In the past. I don't want anything to do with him anymore. You know, he cheated on me." Anna turned away and brushed tears from her eyes. There was an awkward silence. Jacob was digesting this information while Anna tried to calm her emotions. "I'm sorry, only Jacob could only give out a tear rolled down Anna's cheek. "Do you need to rest?" she realized. "I'll come back later." After her departure, Jacob's head was torn apart again, but no longer from pain, but from the confusion and complexity of the circumstances. He liked Anna very much, until he met Coco, but as they had already found out, no Coco had ever existed. The doctor came to see him again, and said that tomorrow morning they would be able to discharge him. Then a policeman came and spent a long time tediously writing some papers near his bed, asking various stupid questions together with a shoddy interpreter. Finally, it was time for bedtime and the exhausted patient. Finally, he was able to rest. The next morning, he was already standing at the front desk waiting for his discharge. He couldn't wait to go back to the hotel, change into clean clothes, wash himself properly, and leave this crazy country forever. "Can you give me the document that the doctor gave you?" asked the girl behind the counter. "Yes," now smiled the young man. He started in the pockets of his shorts, suddenly realized. "Where's my camera?" It was as if he had been hit with a gush of cold water. Had he lost such a precious and important thing in this damn jungle? "Isn't that what you're looking for?" The registrar girl asked him and pulled out his precious photos from somewhere. "In the inventory it says that this bag was found with you on the beach," Anna informed him with a dazzling smile. Jacob frantically grabbed the camera, opened the monitor, and almost collapsed on the floor when he saw the photo. It was Coco, a real live Coco. And next thing you know, there they were, sitting on the grass together. Behind them are dark tropical trees, and above them, that magical starry sky. Jacob whistled. These pictures were sure proof that this whole story was real. He had neither dreamed it nor dreamed it. He wanted to shout and jump with happiness, but everyone would think he was crazy. What can I say? Nobody. No one believed his delusional stories. As soon as he was discharged, Jacob ran out of the hospital in full confidence that he would find his love. "I will find her," the guy said to himself and walked out of the clinic. Jacob towards him, smiling dazzlingly, got out of the parked car. "Anna, I've come for you," she informed him. She hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. He was dumbfounded by such a sudden appearance and behavior, also slightly embraced her. They got into the car and drove to the hotel. All the way he looked at his photos and came to the conclusion that they were truly magnificent. All the hotel staff and tourists gathered at the entrance to greet the traveler who had returned from the other side of the world. Anna, looking at this joyful meeting, she couldn't hide her tears. She didn't expect to see this handsome guy alive. In addition, she was very afraid that he would report to the police about inadmissible negligence on her part, and demand compensation for the harm done to his life and health. Personally from her as a responsible person and from the travel agency. That's why she went to the hospital. That's why she offered him a date. She saw the way he looked at her the first day he arrived. She'd seen the way he'd fallen in love with her slender legs and other charms. But Jacob, carried away by his feelings and memories, did not even think about all this. The hotel staff was also very happy about the return of the missing guest. Everyone tried to do him something nice. The administration threw a fancy dinner with alcoholic drinks for the whole group. They were also partly to blame for the missing tourist. After all, it was the hotel that provided the jungle travelers with such flimsy trackers. Jacob tried to find out from the hotel staff where the Aboriginal settlement was located. But they only shrugged their shoulders. Either they really did not know the location of the village, or Jacob spoke English so badly. In any case, even after a couple of days, he still could not get anything from them. "Val, how are you?" asked him. Anna sat down at his table at dinner. "I'm great," thoughtfully answered the guy, taking another sip of wine. "And how are you? What about Jim?" "My lawyer is preparing the divorce papers for now." The girl frowned. This was clearly not what she wanted from her conversation with Jacob. "Have you thought about my proposal?" The guy was silent for a long time, looked at one point, and then woke up, and with the proposal to walk, to get better acquainted. Anna reminded me. She seemed very uncomfortable with this conversation. "I'm sorry, I don't think now is the time. I haven't quite recovered yet. You can see how absent-minded I am." He smiled guiltily at her. "It's okay, no problem." Anna smiled, and fled as quickly as possible. Jacob didn't care at all. He was only thinking about Coco and where he could find her. The young man decided to go where he came from to the port. That was where it was full of different merchants. They surely had to know where the natives lived. Getting out of bed early in the morning, he went to the cab he had ordered the night before. The night before he had arranged with a man to take him to the harbor. But the man was not there now. "Who are you looking for?" asked Anna, passing by. "Yes," stammered Jacob. The cab driver didn't see. So he left on an excursion to the mountains. It is worth telling here that as soon as it became known about the missing tourist in Anna's group, she was immediately fired from her job. However, she was forced to stay here until the general departure. Shortly afterward, she learned of her husband's infidelity. All this broke her down. The only escape from her moping was Jacob. There was something about that guy, but he turned his back on her too. That's when she decided to win him over herself. To do this, she discouraged the driver to go with Jacob, saying that he was sick. And now she planned to take the driver's seat herself. "It's just that we made a deal with him yesterday. He didn't say anything about a tour," Jacob explained. "Let me take you where you need to go." Anna offered with a smile. "I have the keys, from where they gave them. Even when I was a tour guide, I will leave. They will take away." Jacob did not understand her game and agreed. They fairly quickly rushed to the pier. Here the guy thanked his companion and asked to leave him alone. Anna was greatly disappointed by this, but he did not even pay any attention to her mood and went in search of information about his beloved. At the harbor, a local boy was also mistaken. Apparently the same age as Jacob himself, he was selling various national souvenirs from a trade to tourists. "Hey, Frente," I said hello to him. Jacob in English. "Do you know where to be a village of local people?" "Village people. There's a village guy," cheerfully answered the merchant and waved his hand. "No, you do not understand me, people and other people," tried to explain Jacob. "Other people." "No, I do not. Guy buy goods, here spoons, mugs take." "No thanks," frustrated, muttered Jacob, and headed to the next vendor, bearded a man with a red cape on his shoulders. "I have only the finest quality fabrics." This bearded man beckoned to the customers. Jacob approached him under the guise of an ordinary customer. "Hello," greeted the merchant. "What do you want, dear?" "You help me village to the jungle. Where is the village?" "I do not understand you," said the man already without any enthusiasm, "but you know the village." "1 second. Jacob pulled out of his pants pocket the very picture. "How much to know this girl?" "No, that's your fancy. Beautiful." I hope so, Jacob thought to himself. Are you looking for a village in the jungle? Suddenly asked someone's voice from behind. Jacob turned around to look at him. A swarthy, low-statured man was watching. Do you want to find the village of the people? He repeated his question. Yes, almost jumping for joy, shouted the boy. Come with me. Jacob gladly obeyed. They walked through the entire makeshift market and came out to a dilapidated wooden house. Immediately he shouted to them around it were a yard of stroller legs that tourists rode on. The teenagers in the 10th tree were sitting and playing cards with several men of obviously gangster appearance. All of them were swarthy and black-haired, talking loudly, arguing and giving the impression of people who were experienced and smitten. One of them was much taller than the others, and muscular. This guy needs help, said the guide Jacob, turning to his acquaintances. They looked at them grimly without saying a word and went back to their game. Yes, began Jacob cautiously. I'm looking for an aboriginal village, he said in Polish, and immediately scolded himself for being stupid. He had forgotten that English was barely spoken here. What was his surprise when one of the seated men answered him in Polish? Aborigines, you say? Well, there are some here, only far up high in the mountains. You speak Polish, without hiding his surprise, exclaimed Jacob. Yes, I understand that you are very surprised. But here, you know, son, what surprises me most of all, that timidly asked Jacob, your abnormal interest in these damn savages? What do you need them for? Here Jacob had nothing else to do but to tell them the story of his unhappy love, his fragile happiness, which he gained and immediately lost. So you need to find this girl? The formidable tall man concluded. Jacob nodded affirmatively. How much do you want? He asked. The man, after thinking a bit with his cronies in his own language. Pay 100,000 and we'll take you to these crazy savages, he said. And don't think of haggling, or you'll fly upside down right there, and he jabbed his hand carelessly toward the dock. Jacob didn't even flinch. He did not spare any money to find his happiness. That's why he easily made such a promise, deciding to give his camera to the counselors as payment on his return. It's a very expensive device, the boy convinced them. You will be able to get much more than 100,000 of your money for it. The local leader didn't take anyone's word for it and dragged Jacob to a nearby pawn shop. There they confirmed to him that they would give him 100,000 even as collateral. The satisfied bandit gave his consent. He and Jacob took the camera to the pawn shop. Each received 50,000 and the owner gave them a receipt. Jacob left the other half of the amount with the pawn shop owner in the safe. If I come back alive, I will give you everything as agreed, the guy told his escort. If we can take the girl with us, you will also get the camera, and that's another 500,000 for your money. Now all that was left to do was to wait until morning, because that's when the small group decided to move out. They met at the same place at the earliest possible hour. All were dressed appropriately for the occasion. Everyone had a weapon, and Jacob was glad of it. In the jungle, it was really necessary. After all, not only wild animals lived there, but also wild people. Now with such a team, Jacob was not scary neither snakes, nor gorillas, nor crazy chiefs. On their way, they met poisonous cobras, huge spiders, and even a tiger. But all these animals bypassed them. No battle was fought, no horrors happened. Jacob decided it was a good omen. We were almost there, and the guy pronounced the muscular bandit. Toward evening, when tired from the long walk, Jacob was ready to fall over nothing and never move again. But I don't think you'll be so welcome in this village. He grinned. I looked at Jacob and saw familiar places. The same clearing where they had sat with the doll, gazing at the stars. And there was the familiar village. It was still quite light, so a lot of people came out to see what kind of strangers came to their territory. At their head, of course, was the old chief. He gave Jacob a scornful look. Why have you come to us? You rascal again, growled the chief. The guide immediately translated these words for the customer into Polish. Tell him I have come for cocoa, said Jacob. The boy wants to talk to your daughter, the interpreter said. Jacob himself caught the old chief's menacing and judgmental gaze. No, Coco's father cut him off. The men had foreseen this option, and pointed their pistols in the direction of the gathered tribe. It saw the girl. The leader commanded about the counselors. The chief made a terrible grimace and shook his staff. All the male savages immediately thrust forward their spears and looked very belligerent. The chief began to prepare something in his own language, and so quickly that even the interpreter could not keep track of his curses and swear words. He didn't need to. He raised his pistol and shot into the air more quickly. There were screams of shrieking women, children, armed with spears and bows. The crowd drew these theses and prepared to shoot at the uninvited guests. Suddenly, from behind their backs, Coco sprang forward. She was amazed and angered by the reappearance of Jacob. She ran up to the chief and quickly said something to him, gesticulating desperately. The chief nodded and made a sign to his men. "Put down your weapons. Let's go." Dahl grabbed Jacob by the arm and pulled him to the side. "What the hell are you doing here, forget you?" Jacob replied in a gentle voice and smiled stupidly. All the colors of light and the words he had prepared for this meeting just slipped out of his head. He missed this girl so much. As soon as he saw her, he drowned in those stray eyes of Coco's. "I want to take you away from here," he blurted out. "You don't belong here." That's how she made an impenetrable face and straightened proudly. "And why do I want you to be my begging wife?" said the lad. "I will take you away with me to my homeland. These people, these savages. Do you really want to live your whole life like this?" She lowered her eyes and was silent for a minute. The villagers and the chief himself watched the whole scene, but they did not understand a single word of the lovers' conversation. Finally, Coco raised her gaze to Jacob again. "Jacob, you're a very nice guy, and I really like you. But I can't do this. My family's here now, a family that doesn't respect you, that kills people. Just like that. It's nothing like that." Coco objected. "You don't know anything about our lives. You think just because you've been here a couple days you're an expert." She grinned. "All families have their skeletons in the closet. But I'm not leaving here ever. These people sheltered my mom and me when we were almost dying from our wounds, hunger, and thirst. She often told me how cruelly my own father had treated her, how she had suffered in that distant cold country. She and I were flying to visit distant relatives, and she bought those tickets with her last money because we had nowhere else to go. But it's a very long story, and you don't need it." Coco cut herself off. "All you need to know is this. This is where my mom and I found love, care, found a real family. This is her grave. Besides, here is my Bon, my boy, whom I raised as my own son. You intend to take him with you too?" she asked ironically. Jacob was suppressively silent. "I can never leave this place," she said firmly. "And to be honest, you acted like the ultimate idiot. If you'd stuck to the rules, none of this would have happened. You were welcomed as a guest, and you violated our laws of hospitality, Coco." "What are you talking about?" Stunned spoke Jacob. "Wake up. Come with me. I beg you. Let's go away from these filthy savages who stuffed your pretty head with all kinds of nonsense. You're a Russian girl. I'll take you home. You don't belong here, please." "This is where I belong," she declared, glaring angrily. "I'll be a stranger there, and you'll be the first to reject me." "Did my mom tell me how conniving men can be?" she added, and her lips quivered. "I saw you with her." Suddenly she added and turned away, looking like a hurt child. "Who was Jacob's apex with?" "With that gorgeous hottie outside the hospital. I saw you being taken away and followed." "Where did she put you?" Said Coco quietly that morning when you left the hospital. "She kissed you and you hugged her and laughed. You've got it all wrong." Coco tried to change her mind to Jacob. "Anna and I are just friends. She's my guide, and she's married." Finally, he found himself and gave out this argument, hoping that it will sober up the jealous Coco. "Married." She was amazed. Mom was right. In your horrible country, all people are promiscuous and lustful scoundrels. Yes, in our country, a married woman doesn't even dare to go near another man. And you? How dare you embrace her when you know she has a husband? "Go away. I don't even want to know you," she sang, like a snake, and spit at his feet. Jacob was completely confused. He looked at the girl for a long time and could not understand whether she was making a show in front of her father or telling the truth. But Coco's look testified that all this was said in earnest. She does not understand another life, will not leave her tribe or her mother's grave. A terrible blow to the young man's very heart. But it was her choice, and he had no right to judge her. He sighed heavily, turned and made a sign to his mercenaries. "Let's go. Goodbye, Coco." Sadly, he said to his beloved, standing already beside the leader. For the last time, he plunged into her bottomless eyes. It was less than 24 hours before the departure of the cruise liner. Jacob lay in his hotel room, unable to find a place to sleep. He thought only of her hair, her lips, her eyes. He wanted to see again, even for a brief moment, this mysterious girl who had been through so much. If she wasn't going to be with him, then why was she helping him? Why had she saved his life? Perhaps he would never be able to understand her choices. God, why is everything so complicated in this life? Jacob took his camera and dialed a familiar number. "Hello," answered a thin girl's voice. "Anya, would you like to come with me to this last dinner?" "Yes, okay. I'll be right back to pick you up." He ended the call, shook his head, looked at himself in the mirror, and with a determined step, walked out of the room towards his destiny. Quite a few years had passed since then. Jacob left his boring office. He graduated from a specialized college, then university, and became quite famous and well-paid photojournalist. In achieving this goal, he was greatly helped by the very photo he took in the distant tropical jungle, and of course, his parents who always supported their son in everything. "Honey, I made you breakfast." The gentle voice of his wife reached here and from the kitchen. Jacob yawned once more and got out of bed. It had been a long time since he had lived with his parents. Now he had a beautiful modern apartment in a new building. Pulling up, Jacob entered the kitchen. On the high chair sat his 1-year-old son Arseny. He was already eating his morning porridge. Of course, he was not particularly good at it, but his loving mother helped him in everything. "Sit down, Jacob. Cheesecake's already. And here you go." On the table appeared a large dish, full of appetizing golden. Krugliakov Jacob picked up a couple, put to his plate. "Very tasty, my dear." What did he throw his wife in the cheek? "How'd you sleep? You came back to work so late last night. What do you want?" The man shrugged. He sipped the coffee his wife had carefully brewed in the large kitchen. As always, the TV was on in the background, of course, on the news channel. Suddenly, Jacob saw vaguely familiar terrain on the screen and turned up the volume. Cautiously, he said, "Leaving the cup 3 hours ago, a terrible tsunami had struck the coast and nearby areas of Central and West Africa." Commented on the terrifying footage. Announcer. Severely affected the territory of Cameroon. Many settlements, tourist complexes, and other objects of infrastructure will be washed off the face of the earth. In addition, a large mudslide came down from the mountains near the village of Buda. The footage kept flashing on the screen. The disaster-stricken area, familiar to both of them, looked terrible. And what was happening there now looked more like an apocalyptic movie than anything else. "Jesus," that's what the shocked Anna said, and sat down on a chair, staring at the TV screen. Jacob's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. The head of the newsroom was calling. "Saw the broadcast," he shouted. "Immediately we load everything and leave for the site. The whole group should be ready in half an hour tops." At 12, he booked the flight. Jacob was not used to such situations. An alarming backpack was always waiting in the check room. His wife had long since accepted the schedule of her husband and did not ask unnecessary questions. After 15 minutes, Jacob fully equipped, fully kissed goodbye to his wife and son, and quickly walked out of the apartment. On the spot, the film crew arrived without much incident. Fortunately, the nearest convenient airport was not affected by the rampant elements. At the ramp, they were already waiting for a special vehicle that could take the correspondents to the border with the danger zone. Further, they flew by helicopter, flying over the very places where in his youth he had experienced so many exciting and tragic events. The man involuntarily gave himself over to the memories. They were flying over the very epicenter of the disaster. Piles of garbage and all sorts of debris that had once been neat houses, hotels, shopping centers, and hospitals were mixed with earth, trees, and dirty water. Rescue efforts unfolded all around. Poor survivors wept over the bodies of loved ones. The once beautiful coastline no longer existed. The crew took many good photos and recorded a great report from the scene. The company management will be pleased with the sudden anger, Jacob thought. He hated this part of his job with all his soul, having to do business on someone else's misfortune. Besides, it wasn't the laying thoughts that haunted him, it was Coco. How long had it been? He hadn't thought of her. And her village wasn't that far from here either, folks. We urgently need to get up into the jungle, he announced to his colleagues. What's that for? The leader of this expedition was indignant. Our work is almost done. There we will make stunning footage. Jacob didn't stop. I know what I'm saying. I was once long ago at these places. Here in these mountains still exists completely secluded, and a village of natives may still exist, he added, mentally with sorrow. That's not where you took that crazy picture you got paid so much money for. The coworker perked up. Jacob nodded silently with a bow, commanded his boss, and began to rush the employees. We need to get to the Dan village before dark. The jungle was also very badly damaged. Here and there you could see huge trees uprooted, huge layers of soil, giant rocks. Forest fires were raging all around. Jacob was struggling to gaze at the terrain and trying to check the maps here. Shouted he finally into the speaker of his helmet. Going down. The small creek was now out of its banks and looked like a real stormy stream. From far away from the Aboriginal camp came loud cries, groans, wounded, and mooing of frightened animals. With difficulty finding a place to land. An experienced pilot managed to land the helicopter here. Correspondents rushed to the scene in droves. Jacob was not filming anything. His face was focused and frowning. All around was the same as on the coast. The rubble, the debris, the dead bodies had oriented themselves a bit. He hurried to where he thought the posts around the fire had once stood. The vivid earlier memories had already been erased, and his panic fear of this place was long gone. Jacob searched the whole territory of the destroyed village, lumping into people's corpses and debris, and tried to find his Coco alive or dead, to at least give her a decent burial. Then a heavy stomping sounded behind him. Jacob stirred. He recognized those heavy footsteps. From somewhere from behind the rubble jumped out a huge, giving bomb. Jacob exclaimed. It was undoubtedly Bombu, only very much more mature. A real giant. He was carrying a breathless female body in his arms. Jacob ran swiftly toward the beast, regardless of the warning shouts of his colleagues. In the caverns of the beast, he saw his Coco. It was absolutely certain. It was her. The same hair, the same delicate features of the dear face. The woman was unconscious, a deep gash shone on her neck. One arm dangled powerlessly precisely on a thin thread. Jacob's heart clenched painfully. Coco, my darling. Bombu carefully placed his precious burden on the ground, lowered himself beside her, and suddenly a terrifying blaze. Hammering themselves in the chest with long furry paws with things. Jacob felt for a pulse, hurt often and interrupting the first aid kit with all his might, he yelled. We can still save her. One of his friends ran a little closer and threw the first aid kit, fearing the giant gorilla. Jacob frantically tore open the packages, trying to do something for Coco, but it was already quite clear to him that they had arrived here too late. Suddenly, in the folds of the fabric of Coco's clothing, he caught some sort of movement, a soft cry. Hello, the woman spoke weakly and opened her eyes. She tried to find her baby with her eyes. There she was. Jacob held the wrapped baby up to her face. Look, she's all right. Jacob with one lip sang Coco in surprise. Jacob, take her, take her. She wanted to say something else, but she couldn't. A thin trickle of blood dripped from the corners of her lips. The doll twitched her whole body and closed her bottomless eyes forever. Jacob howled just as he had just roared a bomb-bull jab not from Coco. The astonished coworkers crowded in the distance, gazing at this heartbreaking scene. They chatted quietly. Someone even wanted to take a few pictures, but the head of the expedition abruptly stopped these attempts. I'll keep her safe. Dear Coco, Wiping away tears, said the man. Goodbye. The big gorilla carefully picked up the body of his foster mother from the ground and in a few leaps ran away into the jungle. Honey, I'm home. Jacob opened the door and entered the apartment. How are you? Towards him ran out two cheerful, naughty children, a boy and a girl almost the same age. Daddy, Daddy, what did you bring us? Did they hang around their father's neck, climbing into his bags or pockets? Val, it's about time. How was the trip? His smiling wife came over and kissed him. Anna, it's fine. I brought you some presents from Australia. Dad, you brought me a kangaroo. A little girl about 3 years old asked hopefully. Dark-skinned, pretty with huge azure, like seawater. Her eyes are inexpensive. He smiled and sat her on his lap. But I brought you this. Look, I like it. Thank you. The little girl brightened and skipped off to play with the new thing. In the evening, Jacob enjoyed the family coziness and watched how cheerfully play together their children with Anya. The wife was not easily given such a decision of her husband, and there was a time when they almost divorced because of this situation. But now it's all in the past. Little Alice, that's what he decided to call her, managed to melt the resentful heart of her adoptive mother, and she took her into the family and began to bring her up as her own daughter. Finally, Jacob was completely happy. He no longer felt guilty about Coco. She had once saved his life, and now he returned the favor. When his daughter grows up, he will be sure to tell her a wonderful story about the plane crash, secluded in the jungle, a village of its inhabitants. About a naive boy who underwent all possible horrors, lost in the jungle, and then met a beautiful set and fell in love with her without memory. He will tell her everything, show her old photos, and then she will definitely remember her wonderful and heroic mother.